I think I'm just manic because I'm actually enjoying a new Sonic game.
I'm
And I
manic
think
as fuck the
triggered
last few
me.
days, man. I've been
Yeah.
super manic. I do not know what the fuck is going on with me.
I had like a creative breakthrough that was like that kind of like euphoria that you get too in a manic episode.
Yeah.
And it's like manic depression too, where like I'll be super excited and then I just feel forgotten. It's like you get that like mania ego, and then you're like, oh, nobody cares about me. I'm all alone. That kind of shit at
Yeah.
once. Really, that's like school shooter shit. It's not it's not a good combination of emotions.
I mean, I forget about you all the time. So
Yeah,
I understand what you're
I
saying.
do too. I take a piss. I'm just thinking about Sonic or something. I look in the mirror like, oh, that guy. That's me.
You look in the mirror and you see no one. You forget your own image. All right, welcome to Cinema Chats, episode 6. I am your host, Chad. I'm here with my co host, Chad. We're going to be talking about Lawrence Kasdan's seminal 30s. Well, it's not a 30s film, but it's about people
Yeah.
in their 30s. It's a seminal 30 something film, The Big Chill. Now, the first thing I want to get out of the way here is that we are not the generation or the target audience for this movie by any means. I don't think anyone in our age group has ever talked about this movie on the internet. This might be we
No,
might be doing some avant-garde.
we're trendsetters. Chads are leaders. It's beta to follow the Chad, and that's what our fans are going to be called. They're the betas
Yeah,
or the simps,
you guys want
whatever
to
they
talk about
prefer.
some superhero shit? We want to talk about these movies with a bunch of boomers hanging out in a house for 2 days. That's real cinema.
The first thing I want to talk about with the movie is I told a friend, I was texting her about it, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to record tonight." And she said, "What are you recording about?" And I said, "The Big Chill." And she said, "I read that as The Big Chili," and I want to see that movie.
It's a giant There's a movie with Danny Aiello that I thought I fever dreamed called The Pickle, and they used to play the trailer for it. It was on the Super Mario Brothers movie VHS tape. And I thought this was like a Mandela effect thing. And then I looked it up online,
Yeah.
and there's legitimately a movie where Danny Aiello's this like director, and he makes a blockbuster about a giant like spaceship that's a pickle.
Well, the thing that's lost, speaking of like old artifacts from time, what people miss out on today is trailers on DVDs. That is a thing, but specifically VHS trailers are something so special. Like you play them as you're making the popcorn, getting ready for the movie you rented that night. It is such a special movie going experience. It's totally lost now, which is just tragic.
Well, I remember there were certain VHSs that I had that part of what made the VHS so wonderful was that it had specific trailers that I liked. Because that was the only way you could see trailers
Exactly.
back then. There was no YouTube to look up trailers.
Remember when trailers first hit the internet? I remember Elf was a big one, and I think Signs, you had to wait like 10 minutes for it to load
I
in
did
like
that.
340.
I did that with the Spider-Man trailer and Scooby Doo,
Oh yeah,
where it had to buffer for like
yeah.
20
You
minutes,
you get to see like a TikTok length, like 10 seconds, and it freezes.
and the quality was like 240.
Yeah, and even then, that was still better and more exciting than most trailers today.
Oh, you'll never be able to get that rush that you got from like early videos being able to be posted on the internet. That's
No,
gone.
definitely not.
That high is
E- e-
never coming back.
Even stuff like I don't like this generation of comedy. I think it's because like I was a preteen when teens were into it that I didn't like. But like so like Charlie the Unicorn and all that, like seeing that, even if I didn't like it, it was like, oh, you could do this and just put this on the internet, or what's his name, Salad Fingers, that kind of shit, that
Yeah.
Newgrounds kind of stuff. Like it's crazy looking back on it and be like, oh, that was new at one point.
E-Bombs World.
Yeah. I think that was a little too responsible for my development in a few ways.
Every girl I knew back then, like as a teenager, was into Salad Fingers and Charlie the Unicorn.
Yeah.
It was a thing. The
Did
door.
guy did guys ever like it, do you think, or do you think they just lied to get laid?
Oh, I think that's most things.
It's really funny looking back at so many things. Like, did guys ever really like this? Like, oh, they were lying.
Yeah, the craziest thing too is I think women know that they're lying, but they still just like the attention.
Yeah, because like the guy's willing to lie to give her attention, and that's almost more meaningful than if he genuinely cared about the subject.
That's true. It takes more effort than if you actually care. Like if she comes over and she's like, "Hey, let's talk about Kislowski films," you'd be like, "Okay," but
Yeah,
you have to sit there and watch Disney movies.
unfortunately.
Yeah, you have to pretend that you want to watch this, and it's never like the Disney movie that you kind of like. It's not like let's put on Great Mouse
No.
Detective, and you're like, that'd be a good night.
I'm trying to think of like the mediocre ones I've seen. I think Zootopia I wasn't into. Big Hero 6. I fell off with Disney. I don't watch a lot of their shit, so it's been years, but I
Yeah,
know
I
like
mean,
a lot of women like Big Hero 6 and it's like pretty mid. It's
yeah,
not bad,
because I
but it's
don't want to sit
boring.
here and like shit on Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, and all
No,
that. Those were good movies. Like I like those movies too.
exactly. Well, there's just lesser ones.
Okay, so Uh, I wrote way too many notes for this episode. This might be a 3-hour podcast on a movie
Yeah.
that nobody talks about anymore. It has no more cultural relevance, and it's 100 minutes long. And I wrote like 2 pages worth of notes from my recent viewing. So the first thing I want to open up with is you pick this one. We kind of go back and forth
Yeah.
on
Whoops.
we kind of go back and forth usually on like who picks what. Like some we agree on. We were like, let's do Scooby Doo on Zombie Island.
Yeah.
But this one was one that you picked out. I don't know if this would have ever come to the top of my head. Sort of like how we talked about we wanted to do Woody Allen. So that's my first thing. Why the big chill? Why do you want to talk about this one?
I don't know. No, it's a really personal movie for me. It's actually the movie that got me back into movies in 2018. I had a lot of issues back then, and like I was just operating like it's that point where you become a man, where you're completely lost and you feel helpless. And my family was falling apart, tons of stuff like that, and so I just didn't have the capacity to watch movies anymore. I was working like 7 days a week, just craziness. And then I happened to, when things started cooling down, this was probably the first, maybe the second movie that I saw, and it was such a great experience and one of the best movie viewings I'd ever had that I give it a lot of credit for getting me back into movies after maybe a year or so. I just didn't have the mental capacity for it. So I think I have a lot of sentimentality about this movie.
Well, I want to talk about my relationship with it because this was a much more culturally relevant film when I was younger. Now, Criterion did release this recently, so I want to
Yeah,
acknowledge that there's still a big chill thing out there at some level. But when I was young and a teenager, this was like a famous movie, and I think obviously a
yeah,
lot
it's
of
a
it has
household name.
because our parents were the age group of people that this movie was made
Mm-hmm.
about, made for. But just the title, I knew the title so much more than the movie. The Big Chill, I think,
Yeah,
might be one of the like 100 most famous movie titles of all time.
I honestly thought it was about snow. Like I thought it was like they're stuck on a mountain or something. Because I heard the title so much, but I didn't know what the movie was about.
What's that Ang Lee film with Kevin
Oh,
Kline? No, that one from the 90s, Ice Storm. And the,
oh yeah,
and there's an ice storm in the movie, but it's about the coldness of the time. So,
yeah. I thought it was something like that.
yeah, I first saw this movie when I was like, I'm going to say 14, probably 13. I can't quite remember. I was a teenager and I watched it on TV. Uh, I got into weird directors that were like invisible directors that weren't really like everybody was all about Kubrick and all this stuff. And I liked Sidney Lumet films. I liked Mike Nichols films, even though The Graduate's very stylish. A lot of his
I'm
films are.
imagining you. I'm imagining getting bullied in high school for liking Sidney Lumet all by all the Kubrick chads.
Scorsese fans. Well, it's a sensibility I have. I really like films that don't draw attention to themselves visually. I like when films aren't
Hmm.
aesthetic. I like these kind of you just went completely dark.
And so all you can see is my eyes.
Yeah, I
I
know it's
have to
scary.
wait for the light to turn back on.
Yeah, we'll talk about the big chill.
The big chiller.
But I like these movies with these. writer directors that aren't really known as like auteur filmmakers. They're almost
Hmm.
workmanlike. And I became obsessed with a lot of these sorts of movies because what I think what I related in them was that it felt like something I could do. You know, I it's
What
not
I
like
like is, sorry,
I don't watch 2001 and think I can do that someday, but I would watch a movie like a Lawrence Kasdan film and be like, "Oh, I think I could actually do something like that." And that's or Woody Allen's even a good example of that. I'm not saying write the
yeah.
screenplays he could write, but it's like, oh, you can make a movie on a budget like this about people talking, and it could be a
What
good
I
movie.
love is incredibly efficient filmmaking. I don't think it's lazy or not stylish. I just think it's very efficient. And sometimes simplicity is the right way to tell a story.
Well, we have to talk about the Lawrence Kasdan piece of this because he's the, he's really, I would say, I mean, there's a couple actors in this, but if you're really looking at this movie's reputation and how it affects careers, he's the big element here. So
Mhm.
obviously, writes on Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That alone makes him like a legendary guy.
Yeah.
Mostly wrote a lot of the dialogue in those movies. He was kind of a punch up guy. Has his directorial debut, Body Heat, which is a neo noir, essentially a remake of I don't want to say Double Indemnity, but it's a remake of sorts. With William Hurt and God, I can't Jessica Rabbit. Funny, I can't think of her name right now. Uh I don't know. She was a famous sex symbol and actress in the 80s. She was in a bunch of movies. She was in War of the Roses and um anyway, he makes that. It's a very successful movie. He gets a lot of credit for that. And then he follows it up with this. This movie cost $8 million. It makes $56 million. It's a big hit. It's got a famous soundtrack. It's got a bunch of actors that at the time weren't really famous. Now you look back and this is I would argue this might be the most impressive ensemble in an 80s film or a mainstream one.
Yeah.
Just for the actors that are in it, it's insane. I mean, like 4 people in this cast are A-listers that went on to have huge, huge careers. And it was the first film to really. Now, it wasn't the first film to do this, but in a commercial sense, it was the first film that really kicked in and capitalized on the baby boomer generation going into the 80s and then leads to stuff like The Wonder Years or the show 30 something, which is essentially based off this movie.
I was getting a lot of Breakfast Club vibes even.
I
I don't
agree.
know which came first, but I imagine this one did.
This came first. Yeah, this predates Breakfast Club by I think this is 83 and Breakfast Club's 85.
Okay.
I would say it influenced a lot of people. I have no doubt that John Hughes and Cameron Crowe like this
We,
movie.
we were joking about it yesterday. It's clear Stephen King saw this movie.
Well, I want to save that. There is something to bring up
Okay.
with that. Yeah, I have that in the notes, but I want to save that because there's a really funny conversation to have about this.
We'll
Uh,
talk about it later.
I would even say Sex, Lies, and Videotape. This and that trend of the people filming kind of faux interviews and stuff like that with the
Mhm.
camcorder. I can't think of a movie that did it like this before this movie. I almost forgot about that element until
Yeah.
I did this rewatch.
Well, it's such a small part of the movie, but it's such a nice touch too. Especially with William Hurt not opening up, but then he's on camera and he's very eccentric. And you find out he used to do the radio show, but it's you don't know that when he's doing the initial videotape.
So if somebody doesn't know the premise of this movie, because I don't think a lot of younger people know what this movie is or know what it's about. And like I said, it's not a cultural touchstone. Like this used to be referenced. They mentioned this movie in High
Mhm.
Fidelity as a joke. Essentially, it starts with a suicide. You don't see it, but Kevin Kline is bathing his son, and he's already grooming him to think that boomer music is the greatest music ever. He has the kid singing Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog. And then Glenn Close, his wife, comes in. She's crying. And then we go to a funeral. So a group of friends that were sort of radicalized, counterculture, people from the 60s. They're all older now. They haven't seen each other for years. They come back to this town in South Carolina where this character's from, even though I think they were all friends at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And their friend Alex commits suicide. They go to his funeral, and then they decide to stay at Kevin Kline's character's house for the weekend to all kind of catch up and mourn their dead friend. And that's essentially the film. It's just these, I guess there's about 7 or 8 of them. It's this group of friends who get back together after years, and they're talking about their 60s ideals in the context of Reagan's capitalist yuppie 80s. And if they are sellouts, there's a lot of lingering regret and past trauma between the people in the group. They really don't want to talk about the trauma and the tragedy that's brought them all together. They're trying to pretend to have a good time. But slowly, as the movie comes out, a lot of these things unravel between the characters. It's essentially an ensemble comedy that turns into, I would say, an adult drama in the same way The Breakfast Club slowly does turn into a more serious film as it goes along.
Yeah, well, that was the thing with the most recent viewing was I always picked up on it. I think in terms of just in terms of dialogue, this is maybe my favorite comedy script because almost every joke in it is A plus. I think there's funnier movies, but in terms of sheer writing and in terms of dialogue itself, I think it's probably the wittiest comedy script. Um, but watching it this past time, I realized that so much of it is people joking out of discomfort and trying to play it up cool and nonchalant. But there's this really dark underbelly, which shouldn't be surprising for a movie that begins with a suicide. But that always felt like uh, more of, I don't say a minor element of the movie, but it never felt so pervasive in every scene as it did this last time I watched it.
That's what got me in my viewing too. I thought this was very depressing. I had a
Yeah,
very depressing time watching it. I used to really enjoy this movie because it's kind of it's a hangout movie. It's sort of like Dazed and Confused. Like
exactly.
you're just spending time with these people. They're riffing. There's really fun scenes. But on this recent viewing, and I think a lot of this has to do with age. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's because I'm closer now to the age of these characters than I was when I watched it before. And there's sort of universal themes about this movie that are really relevant when you're in your 30s, which is essentially a disillusionment with the ideals that you had when you were younger, and sort of this aimlessness and this disappointment with life as you get older. And yeah, I always saw it as just a good comedy that had some dramatic scenes, but now, yeah, it's clear that they're all coping throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
And that's what was so fascinating about it, which I never saw the intention. It's a much deeper film than I ever thought it was.
It's a more structured film too. It always felt like a collection of scenes, but the last time I watched it, it hit me that like all the characters' life issues are hinted at in the in the eulogy at the beginning of the movie, where he's got this, he's dating this girl Meg Tilly that she's kind of aloof. It seems like they didn't really connect on an emotional level. She was a younger girl, kind of ditzy, and they're all having issues in their marriage. They're all dissatisfied. He had a degree and some science degree, but he's working, I think, unemployment or something like that. And like, why did he not take advantage of his education? And then these other people, like the lawyer character, she's unsatisfied with her job. They're all miserable with their work life, and you realize that they're all dealing with the same things that he struggled with. They're talking about how he never wrote a suicide note. Why would he kill himself? But then all the issues that are hinted at with him, they're also sharing, but they don't really see the connection. And it shows how they've grown apart as well.
Well, it's a very adult film.
Yeah.
It's a film about adults and what adult life is, which is sort of, learning to accept things for what they are as opposed to what you think they're going to be. There's a lot of that in
Mm-hmm.
this movie. It's a group of people that, and maybe the reality of that hits them harder because they're together and they're having to deal with this guy because they're having to deal with mortality.
Yeah.
It feels like from what I get, because they really don't talk about it much, and we'll get into that too. There's sort of a mystery to the Alex character that he was kind of a glue between a lot of these relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that they lose that person in the group starts to reveal a lot of truths about what they really feel about each other. And um, let's just jump in. Let's just talk about the opening. So, this is one of my favorite openings to a movie ever, by far.
Mm-hmm.
Not the first scene with Kevin Kline and the bath. That's
You
fine,
kind
but
of forget it until the movie begins. Like, oh yeah, it's got Jeremiah Bullfrog at the beginning.
yeah, I forgot about the prologue. I was completely
I
shocked
was
when I
thinking about the
watched.
montage.
Yeah, yeah. It starts with the montage of everybody going to to go to the funeral, and they're having these conversations. There's a shot that's wonderful. There's these moments of elegance in this movie where Kevin Kline's kind of just standing out in a field looking,
Yeah.
and then he starts directing cars to go park. And you start to get character introduction. So William Hurt's character Nick, he's with the Meg character, and she's talking about the last time she spoke to Alex. She says, "Last time I spoke to Alex, I yelled at him," and then William Hurt says back to her, "That's probably why he killed himself."
Yeah,
Uh,
that's my favorite line delivery in the whole movie.
oh, it's
What
hilarious.
what I love about it is that it's such a harsh joke, but you understand the friendship and that he's saying it lovingly is because he's making fun of the fact that she's clearly insecure about it. So even though on paper it sounds so harsh and critical, it comes off the exact opposite, which is all in the delivery.
The follow up too. Somebody asks at one point, they go, "How's your life?" And somebody says, "Not good," and they go, "Oh, we're telling the truth."
Yeah. Well, Jeff Goldblum has a great line early on in the movie where he's talking about a funeral and he says, uh, they threw you a big party and it's the one day they know you can't show up.
Yeah, immediately these characters, at least the actors, I don't know if the characters are that well defined, but the actors and the dialogue is very well defined. These are
And
great
their
perform.
chemistry, too. They feel like they've been lifelong friends.
Yeah, Jeff Goldblum's in the car with the Tom Berenger character. Tom Berenger's this Magnum PI TV actor, and Jeff Goldblum wrote this hit piece about him in a magazine, and they have bitterness between each other over it. They have an argument about it in the car while they're riding with Alex's girlfriend, the Meg Tilly character. And he's like, "Oh, I have to do most of my work in limousines." And she's like, "Are you a chauffeur?" Uh,
Yeah,
which just immediately
I was thinking about that line today.
there's like 20 hilarious lines in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, and even with her, like they're riding in the car, and she's like, "I'm disappointed. I want to ride in the limousine," and that's what prompts the conversation, just showing how like she's just a strange fucking person.
She's one of the weird. I was this
She's like
series.
was Ali Sheeny in Breakfast Club. She's that
Yes.
character in this movie.
No, it blew me away on this recent viewing, just like how odd her character is, like how goth she
Yeah,
is. Like, there's a part where she's doing yoga and she's talking to William Hurt's character Nick as he's filming her, and as she's like explaining things about Alex to him, and it's just these. She laughs at awkward moments. You know,
yeah,
she's just a strange character, and Meg Tilly's performance is really strange. So they go to the funeral. Kevin Kline goes to give a speech. He starts crying, has a breakdown, and then somebody says, "Okay, they're gonna play Alex's favorite song on piano," and it's the arguably this if it's not the most iconic scene, it's in the top 3 most iconic scenes of this movie, is you can't always get what you want. They start playing on the piano, then the actual song by the Rolling Stones kicks in, and we kinda get the transition from them leaving the funeral to go to the house afterwards as we care for the character. So a couple notes on this for me. My best friend when I was 17 committed suicide. This is one of those cringy things that I hate to admit now, because it's just the cringe of a teenager. It's like a yearbook quote. You know, you look
mhm.
back and you're like, "Oh, I quoted Changes by David Bowie. I shouldn't have done that." You know, it's like Breakfast Club now, the opening with the Changes quote. It's like, "Oh,
Yeah,
no, no, that hasn't aged well." Uh, my best friend, he had stayed with me for about 2 months at my house that summer before he was gonna go off to college. He stayed at my house every night, and I was just getting kinda sick of the guy. 'Cause, you can't spend 18 hours a day with the same person all the time. It just doesn't work
no, it's
out.
hard enough to do that with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I can't live with myself. So I told him he had to leave. I was like, "Hey, my parents are getting mad. You've been staying over too much." And that's really wasn't true, but I was just trying to, I wanted space.
Yeah,
It's hard to
exactly.
it's hard to jerk off when your bro's there all the time.
Sometimes it's easier.
So then he went home that night, and then the next day I got a call that he shot himself in his car outside of his parents' house. So his funeral was a few days. It's only ever like 2 or 3 days after. So
Mhm.
they had his funeral, and I'll admit this. before I went to the funeral, in my bedroom, I listened to "You Can't Always Get What You Want," only because of The Big Chill. That was my relationship with this
It
movie.
could have been worse. You could have listened to Black Eyed Peas.
Mazel
I got a
tov.
feeling.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, Monday, Tuesday,
A
Wednesday.
single tear.
Well, I mean, God, the choice of song here, I mean, the Rolling Stones music and especially the radio hits is kind of aged in a certain way, but man, fuck.
Yeah, it's
It's
probably the best the song's ever been.
yeah, it gives the song a deeper meaning and context than I think it ever had.
Yeah, and I want to bring that up too because it's funny. We discussed one of the other like top five soundtracks in a movie already with American Werewolf. This is one of the other ones for me. Like the movie begins with "Heard It Through the Grapevine," then this. You got "The Wait" by the band later on, and it's when we talk about Rob Zombie's soundtrack, where he's just putting good songs without context. Every song, if it's not as good as it ever was, it's better than it ever was in this movie. It adds to the vibe and the tone of it.
The Whiter Shade of Pale, Procol Harum.
Mhm.
And you have to take into context. It's kind of hard watching this now because a lot of these songs got overused. I think every song in this was
Yeah,
in the Wonder Years at some point. Later, like Whiter Shade of Pale, even the Wait, the band that was an easy writer
yeah.
years before. But at the time, the soundtrack was groundbreaking to take a lot of the '60s, '70s music and just build a whole movie around the soundtrack as opposed to a score. This was not common
And
at
how it
the
reflects
time.
the characters. It's the music they would have listened to.
Yeah, and you can't really have that perspective without that time. Enough time had passed since the '60s that somebody, Lawrence Kasdan, was like, "Hey, let's cash in on this.
Yeah.
Let's put it in." I just want to mention this real quick. This is something I knew about for years. John Sayles, the writer director, who's probably more known as a writer. He wrote on some bigger movies, but he had a pretty successful directing career. He's made some films that I really love. There's that I would highly recommend if you haven't seen. Eight Men Out's probably his most commercial film, but he made these really great films like I gotta get the good name, but there's this one that's an amazing movie where this woman is in a wheelchair and she goes to stay with this nurse who takes care of her, and they build this friendship. And I think it's Mary Lou Henner who's in it, and it's just an amazing movie. City of Hope, Lone Star. Lone Star is a very famous movie that he wrote and directed. He made a movie 3 years before this that is The Big Chill. This is a
Oh yeah.
this
I read about that.
This is the same movie as that movie. That movie was made for $80,000 and it's about a bunch of like radicalized boomers getting back together after years and hanging out for a few days. It's literally the same movie. And Lawrence Kasdan has claimed that he didn't steal this or rip this off. It's very obvious that he did. This is the Hollywood version of that movie. I've even seen that movie. I watched it years ago. Like I torrented it or something. So I just want to
Mhm.
bring that up. It's not super relevant, but I will say that this movie, I do think it is technically a rip off of that film as time has gone on. Uh, the boomer porn of this movie and recent viewings, as opposed to the context of it as a teenager, our relationship with boomers and the now as
You know, it'd be
opposed.
really funny. You like Pornhub, and it's got all the like the different tags that you can look at, and one of you click on Boomer, and it's like clips from the Wonder Years. It's-
Well, because there's multiple reasons that our generation and younger generations don't like the boomers, and a lot of it has to do with the economic situations we're in and cultural situations.
yeah.
But it was this narcissism of that generation that we had the best music, we had the best cultural scene,
Yep.
we had the best, and we were brainwashed by this. Like the Doors,
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin, that was all your dad would show you. It would be movies from back
I
then.
think boomers made the mistake where their parents were too emotionally disconnected. So
Yes.
boomers were like, I'm going to be best friends with my kid. I'm not going to be like my dad was. But then they weren't parents. They just kind of dumped their emotional baggage onto you and tried to get you to be like them.
Well, I don't think they wanted to grow up. I think they thought about
Yeah.
themselves. I think they thought about adulthood as like the man.
Yeah.
And I think they didn't want to be that. So I think they thought, okay, we're going to be friends with our kids. And I don't think it's shocking that we're a generation of like overly sensitive, anxious people.
Yeah.
because we didn't have parental figures in our life. We had a bunch of people, we had adults pretending to be
What's
our friends when we were kids, and then they tried to make us their best friends and be like, "You have to like all the same music and movies and stuff that I do."
You have to dress like me.
Yeah.
Well, it's so funny because like now they'll be like, "What's wrong with your generation? They're all messed up." And it's like, who raised them?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. When I saw this movie as a teenager, I did think this was like the best era of music and the best time for things. I thought
Yeah,
Woodstock and all that stuff, it was a big deal to me. And now watching it, and it's been a criticism of this movie that's made it age for a lot of people that were fans of it, is a lot of people do think this is just because there's been a debate about this movie about it being either a criticism of boomer culture and what they turned into in the 80s. Basically, they sold out and they became hypocrites.
yeah, they
Or
bought in.
is this movie capitalizing on a celebration of, oh, things were so much better back then? And I do think it's somewhere in the middle. I really don't know what Lawrence Kasdan's
Yeah.
trying to say about it in that sense, the generational aspect of it.
I think it's more human than either. I don't think it's straight praise or condemnation. I think it's an exploration. Because these characters are they're not heroes. They're all flawed. They all make mistakes. They're all kind of the butt of the joke sometimes, but they're all emotional at some moments. They have good qualities. It's a very dynamic human movie, and seeing how it juggles the emotional dynamics and the cast dynamics, I don't see it just being a complete propaganda, I guess you could say, or like one-sided political message. In that way, I think it's actually a lot about how they are hypocrites. They did become all the things they hated. They are, I mean, like pretty much like they're all trying. Like Jeff Goldblum's sleazy. He just wants to fuck anything with two legs. Um, some characters are married or trying to leave their spouse in the middle of a divorce. They're clearly not great partners, or even parents is questionable. Um, so I don't think it's like these. This isn't like the Avengers where you're supposed to idolize these people. I think they're very human.
Well, that's what got me on this viewing was because I went in expecting to hate these people because of the boomer thing. I really did. I went in with an
Yeah.
antagonistic relationship because my dislike for boomers has just grown in the last few years for
Mhm.
obvious reasons because they won't just leave, they won't just go away. So it's hard to watch something that's about them because
Mhm.
I don't have a sympathy for them. Like I'm just thinking, well, fuck you guys, you know.
When you see what's it being like good.
But the irony of it is that both of us, our favorite show is like the Wonder Years, which is boomer
Yeah.
propaganda. It's like this kid had the best life ever. It's this
Yeah.
fantasy version of the '60s, where every cliche is thrown in there. So it's not like I
Well,
dislike this sort
how
of
much of
thing.
it? How much of it is that too, though? That it's we were given false promises of life, of what it is, what it should
Yeah.
be, what to expect, and now we're pissed because we got gypped.
Well, yeah, when you realize that the boomer fathers, lied about their lives and how great it was. Because my father would tell these extravagant stories that made it sound like, well, how am I ever supposed to live up to that? Now that I live in the real world, I realize he exaggerated every single thing he ever told me.
Yeah. Or you hear some stories from guys of that generation, and it's like the frat boy kind of pranks they pull or whatever, and then you're like, that's fucked up. That's not funny. That's just messed up.
Literally, my dad, he used to tell me these stories. Well, we talked about this with our fathers, not to
Yeah.
get too personal, but how they treated our mothers when we were young and we were accepting of certain behavior because we thought that's just how it was.
Yeah.
And then you get older and you realize your dad was just a fucking asshole to your mom.
No, it's insane, and it affects. And I'm not like eschewing responsibility, but like you look at like why do men treat women a certain way, and then you look at how these, their archetypal example as a child is how their father treated their mother. And a lot of us had divorced parents that hated each other. That if they were having trouble, they would be like, "Fuck them," blah blah blah. They wouldn't work it out as mature adults. So you think that's acceptable to treat people that
Well,
way, and it takes time to unlearn that.
my dad would just say awful shit to my mother, who was mostly a nice person.
Yeah.
He would say mean stuff to her and I would laugh at it. I thought that was okay.
Yeah, because like if your example of a man is saying this is acceptable, this is funny, you should laugh at it. And it's
Yeah.
really kind of manipulative when you think about it.
Well, I think that's one of the great pains of this is I read a thing once and it hurt because it rang true was just they felt like one of the only generations that didn't want their kids to do better than them. They were in competition with their
Mhm.
children. I feel like my father almost tried to set me up for failure on some level. And he doesn't want me
Yeah,
to succeed. He might act supportive, but I think deep down he wouldn't like the idea if I was more successful or had a better life than him.
yeah. I wonder about stuff like that. It's
Well, I know.
well,
I know
it's
I
hard to
know it's
say in a way because it's like, what opportunity do we have to surpass our parents? We're not
it,
exactly given the opportunity they were.
in the one they created. Yeah, they were
Yeah,
given the most,
exactly.
they were given the best, they were given the housing, they were giving you could go to college and affordable then, you could buy a house back then. I bought
You
this
can
house in
in
19
college.
I could buy this house in 1985 for 40,000 and now I'm trying to sell it for 2 million.
Right.
That's the thing. They
And then they
didn't
complain about our generation. Oh, you have it so easy.
well, they got to get all the benefits of the World War II generation, their parents, and then the Industrial Revolution. They got to reap all the benefits of that. And that we basically get I think you said once it was great, the boomer attitude is like, well, I got mine.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is.
And they just culturally, well, the world changed. They don't really understand technology. They don't get the youth culture, and they're angry about
Yeah.
it. So that I will say I went in with an antagonistic relationship with this movie early on this viewing, just because I went in thinking it was going to be boomer porn, and I thought I would hate these people, but I was surprised that there's kind of a universality about this movie, about getting
Yeah.
older and how friendships drift apart. That's really what I think the movie's about.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think a lot of the movie, I don't think it's specifically about boomers. I think it's using them as the example. Where I think it's a universal with generations and growing up and realizing that you're not the person you thought you would be. Life isn't what you thought it would be. The people you thought would always be around feel like strangers now, even though you have all this in common with this person. Still, you have memories, but you've got tension as well now, and the dynamics changed. But I don't think that's exclusive to boomers. I think that's just the era it's set in.
Yeah, I think it was just the guy writing and directing it was from that age group. I still think this kind of movie
Yeah,
could work now about like our generation
yeah,
or any Actually, I think a Gen X version of this would be amazing. Uh,
hmm
I think they would be more especially like Cusack in a Gen X version of this or something in like the late '90s would have been really interesting to see. I
I
just
think
want
it'd work as like a mini series.
I want to bring this up real quick, just in retrospect. I guess I got hit with this more than I ever thought about. It's pretty crazy Jeff Goldblum's in this movie.
Yeah,
Just for the fact of, I would say he's got to be the most famous person now in this cast. He wouldn't have been at the time or for years after this, but nowadays he's the most famous person of this
yeah.
movie. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, there was a point, it's weird because he basically retired. Kevin Kline was a huge star, like huge. Glenn
Mhm.
Close was a huge star.
Well, Kevin Kline has his underwear now and those clothing lines. He doesn't really need to act anymore.
Well, it's just weird because I love Kevin Kline. I mean, and he got
Yeah,
started late in life in movies. He was a very famous Hamlet. He's often praised as one of the best Hamlets. And his first movie was Sophie's Choice, and he was like 35 in that. And then he goes on this run where he's like in this, and then he wins the Oscar for Fish Called Wanda. And then in the '90s, he was in a bunch of big movies. This is like his second movie. He hadn't been in a lot of movies. He was mostly a stage actor. But Jeff Goldblum being in a supporting role in this, and then just thinking Kasdan writing this and the relationship with Spielberg, I do wonder how much this leads to the Ian Malcolm character in the Jurassic Park thing.
yeah. I think it's a possibility. I think one thing is that Goldblum being used in the capacity he is in this movie is very clever. Where the parts of him that can come off irritating are used to his advantage in this. And I think Ian Malcolm has that too, where it's like he's a side character, so he could have the funny lines and be cool. But I think Goldblum is best as a supporting actor typically. He can carry a movie like The Fly, I get that, but I think in this like where he's kind of sleazy or like his whole like being a journalist, he wants to start a club. It's kind of pathetic and funny because Jeff Goldblum, he has this nerdy quality to him. or when you hear he's a total womanizer, it's shocking because it's unexpected, and they really play into that in this movie.
Well, the Ian Malcolm character is like you take the Fly charisma, the kind of sex appeal
Yeah,
he has in that. He does become like a sex
yeah,
symbol. Ian Malcolm's a sex symbol. And then it's
hmm
like mixed with this character in The Big Chill. It's like you put those two characters together, you get Ian Malcolm's performance.
yeah,
But I just want to bring that up because it kind of got me watching this that he's probably like the fourth or fifth lead in this. He's
yeah.
he's really not one of the
It's really
main
comedic
guys.
relief more than anything.
Yeah, he's the comedy character in this. He's the
He doesn't really
comedy.
have an arc.
No, he's just a hornball that gets
He just
rejected.
doesn't get laid.
Well,
That's his arc.
it's also funny because in a modern context, it seems crazy that a bunch of women would turn down Jeff Goldblum.
It is funny.
In 1983,
Like
seeing this
every woman in the movie too.
yeah, in 1983 in the theater, I don't think that it felt that way. I think it felt fine. But now, women like Jeff
Yeah,
Goldblum. He doesn't have we know that in
it's
real
all
life.
being famous helps you get laid.
Well, also just like watching I mean, don't be wrong. This movie is filled with like some good-looking guys. That's one note I
Yeah,
have here that I want to bring up without sounding too gay. I like that all the guys in this movie are like tall and kind of athletic and
yeah.
handsome. I like that they're guys you could
That is
tell.
one thing. Watching it as, in my case, approaching your 30s, when you're in your 30s, you're like, damn, they all aged really well.
Well, that's the thing about it is that a lot of movies, or think a movie like this, they would try to make the characters, normal people. There'd be mixed. There'd be the fat
Yeah,
friend,
the black friend.
but but in this group, like, it seems like these guys played sports or something. I mean, they're all like six
Yeah,
foot tall or
play
taller.
football.
They're all handsome guys for the most part. There's not none of the guys are really ugly. They're all in shape. I mean, there is something to that. I like that they're not losers or they weren't losers when they were
Yeah,
young.
they're
It
all
kind
successful too.
Yeah, none of them really like they're maybe not unhappy with their jobs, but they all have interesting careers and have made money. So I like that too because that kind of ties into the capitalist aspect of this, sort of
hmm
we were counterculture to these things, to this corporate world, and now we're all benefiting from it.
There's a scene where two characters are making a bed and they're talking about like, oh, isn't it cool we're all successful? And one says, well, it's a good thing money's not a factor for us. And the other just replies, well, fuck them if they can't take a joke. And that's kind of all they leave it on, which I actually think is kind of more poignant than if they focused on it. The kind of hypocrisy of these kind of hippies growing up to be rich people.
Well, that sums up the boomers really well. I talked to some younger people that who don't really get it. They're like, "Why do you hate the boomers so much?" And I'm like, "You don't understand. Like a lot of the things, because you had to kind of grow up in '90s Christian America."
Yeah,
And Satan panic to get it that, we were young. It was like, don't have sex, don't do drugs. All this stuff's bad. And
go to college.
all the people who are telling you this did all of those things so much that it led to STDs being prominent. AIDS blew up in the 80s. Everybody was addicted to cocaine and so on. And then they're telling you not to smoke weed and have sex with your girlfriend when you're 15.
hmm
So there's just a huge hypocrisy for this generation that is
Speaking of parents and talking about like sex stuff and suicide, I heard about someone back in my hometown who his girlfriend was cheating on him with his father, so he hanged himself. And that crosses my mind sometime.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I guess you can't always get what you want unless you're that kid's dad.
Yeah. He's like, don't have sex with your girlfriend. It's really because he's banging her.
Maybe that's what it was. Our dads were just trying to pay our girlfriend. They were just trying to get in, and they're like, "No, don't have her over, but she could come over to my house." But Dad, we live in the same. Shut the fuck up.
How come I have to keep the door open when my girlfriend visits, but when she goes in your room, you close the door?
I mean, I'm going to try this whole episode not to just shit on boomers. There's been a lot of that, but I do think it's key to this movie. I think it is a criticism on some way. At least the characters are reflecting on the fact that
It acknowledges it.
they're phonies.
Yeah.
You know, so I have this here. This is the first standout scene to me. So they get back to the house and they're all kind of catching up and talking about these things. And Glenn Close leaves at one point, and there's just a shot of her naked crying in the shower. Really powerful
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, it
Uh,
is.
like that's the thing about watching it now and how depressing and serious the film was. That's a really serious scene.
It's a good use of nudity in film. Because I always, before I watch a movie, I always try to like think like, is there going to be like insane violence in this or nudity? Because I'll like close the blinds on my windows so that people can't see it because you don't want to just walk past and see people fucking. I get that, but you shouldn't be looking at my window. But nonetheless, but for this music, what's the big chill? They're just talking the whole time. And then I was like, there's that one scene where you see Glenn Close naked. It's like, well, I don't see why anybody would even be offended by this. This is really just like a nude painting or something. It's a very, I guess, eloquent shot in terms of cinematic language. It's not exploitative or sexual in any way.
Well, it's also it's vulnerability.
Exactly.
She's a very closed off character. Out of any of the characters in the
Yeah.
movie, she's the one that's. I mean, I
She's not
felt
very Glenn Close.
Glenn Distant. I mean, we'll talk about more of her later. She just came off to me in this movie as insane.
Yeah.
I just thought the whole time this is a crazy person.
How much of it is that she's in shock because she was closer to Alex than the others in some ways?
Well, the question is, did she love Alex?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing you find out that we both talked about that I think we both forgot. Kevin Kline's wife in this, the Glenn Close character, she had an affair with Alex several times 5 years
Yeah.
previously, and they all like lived together and made up
Mhm.
over this. He like Kevin Kline's basically a cuck in this movie
Yeah.
and accepted that his wife
What's
cheated on him, and and he tells everybody, they all know about it. He's like telling his buddies about it and stuff. He's not
yeah.
keeping it a secret. So I'll tell you right now, I'm not telling my buddies about this. They're coming over to my house for a weekend. I'm like, yeah, things are great.
Well, it's what makes the ending a little more complicated too, where it's like it's almost like that thing where it's like, well, I cheated, so you get your free pass. It's kind of the
Yeah, we have to get to that.
resolution to that.
There's a thing at the end of this movie. Even when I first saw this as a teenager, I was like, what the fuck
Yeah, it's
is?
pretty insane.
It's like the end of Chasing Amy, kind of crazy. Where
Yeah,
it's
to
like,
play totally straight, like a beautiful thing.
yeah, Chasing Amy, it's like they all say that's crazy. Why did you suggest this? Which is realistic. It's like, hey, I think we should
Yeah,
have a three-way, and then the other two characters are like, what? And then in this, Glenn Close character comes up with a plan, and in real life, everybody would go, no, that's insane. And they try to make it like sweet,
yeah,
like it's gonna heal their marriage and their relationship if this action happens. It's like, okay, we solved the problem. This is what
yeah.
we do. This is how you fix an affair and being cucked. This is the solution. So I think the first big standout scene, for me, because for the most part, I think a lot of the early stuff's a lot of setup and it's kind of montagey.
Actually, I don't want to go back to this and cut you off, but what if? I don't think this is implied, but
I'm
what
gonna
if?
go grab a drink, but I can hear you.
All right, I was gonna say, what if the kids that they have, because they're roughly like 5 years old, what if one of the kids was Alex's?
This movie could have been way more interesting.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's the intention at all, but that would be like one way to take the story. Yeah, so basically, what's really interesting about the scene where Calvin Klein has sex with, of course, the light goes up, has sex with his friend, is that they frame it in this way where not only is he a married man sleeping with another woman, but it's his friend that seems platonic. So it's like a friendship moment where they have this physical intimacy, but it's like a friendly fuck. Like you're just like kissing and having sex with your buddy,
I've
and they
never
kind of
heard
joke about it.
I've never heard it pronounced platonic. Is that a way to pronounce that?
I don't know.
No, you're an English major, motherfucker. Like, what are you
That's how I've said it.
maybe
I
it's
don't know.
it might be one of those British,
Yeah, I always thought like Plato, like the philosopher.
because I thought it was platonic, but I guess you can say platonic,
Maybe it's Plutonic.
Plutonic. But I want to talk. God, yeah, because that's the thing about the affair that really got me dark. Because that just adds a sinisterness to this movie. Is the
Yeah,
fact that the guy who killed himself fucked. I would say Kevin Kline's like right up there as like the main character or the second main.
I would say he
I
probably
would
is.
him and Nick, I think, are the two central characters in this movie.
Mhm.
emotionally. I think it's about
Yeah.
the different paths that Nick and him chose in life.
Mhm.
Where one guy decided, I'm going to settle down and have the family and be a successful businessman, and the other guy's still kind of being a drifter in life and chasing new experiences.
What if Alex didn't kill himself, but Calvin Klein killed him, slit his wrist, and made it look like a suicide?
It's a thriller. The Big Chill. Donald Kaufman wrote this movie. He's pitching it.
Chilling. My mom.
The Big Chill. Well, this scene stood out to me. I thought this was a phenomenal scene when I watched it recently, and it really made me think. Fucking Tom Berenger is amazing in this. I really slept on this
Mhm.
performance. I mean, Tom Berenger's great. Platoon, I Am Reality, and Eddie and the Cruisers and Major League and stuff like that. Uh, and he's basically playing like Tom Selleck in this.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where they're all hanging out in the living room and they're catching up and they're all having a good time, and then he kind of turns it seriously to a serious note about like, I hate that we all had to get together over this, and Glenn Close leaves. And he has this speech that he delivers fucking perfectly. I forgot what this is like. In LA, I don't know who to trust. I feel like someone wants something from me. It's terrible, but it's true. I don't know what people think about me. I don't know why they like me, or even if they do like me. Then Kevin Kline says, well, you don't have that problem here. Tom Berenger smiles, and then he says, I don't like you. That's good
Yeah. Well,
shit,
that's
man. That's good.
it is. That always stands out because it's such a realistic moment. And the way the comedy plays is
Yeah.
sweet, yet even though what he's saying isn't on paper, it's just great acting, great writing.
That's when this movie's cooking. Is those
Yeah.
scenes. It's when they're all together in a room and there's dynamics playing out, because when he's saying, I don't like you, he's saying, I love you.
Yeah.
So then when Jeff Goldblum says, me too. But
He's referencing the movement.
Tom Berenger, when he says that scene though, when he just says that thing, I don't know what people think. I don't know if they like me or if they even do. I
Mhm.
just can't. This is what I love about movies like this, and they don't make movies like this anymore. You can still find something like this on television, but just like a guy sitting on the floor in a living room, like we all do in real life, and he's just like saying some real shit about
And you
like,
got to keep in mind, it's Magnum PI. He's on the TV. The cop that that pulls William Hurt over wants his autograph. He wants something from him. All these people like him, but really they just want a piece of him.
well, I put something down here with that too. He says that line early on in the movie. Everyone in this movie, in this group of friends that he thinks is trust, they all want something from him.
Mhm.
The Meg character wants to get impregnated
And
by him.
separate.
Yeah, the other woman who has a husband, Richard, she wants to have an affair with him. They use him to get out of that situation with the cop. They're using him. Jeff Goldblum
Yeah.
wants him to help him with the club and invest in it. So they're no different from the people he's talking about. I think that's intentional. There's a
Mhm.
lot of really beautifully nuanced writing in this where all these things are kind of set up and then they all play out there. But you have to really pay attention. It's not a movie
Yeah.
you can you think you can casually watch The Big Chill, but if you watch it really
I have a funny
seriously,
story
it's
about that
it's a
actually.
fine piece of writing. It reminds me of Cameron Crowe movies.
One year for my birthday, I watched this with a bunch of friends. It was gonna be like a big. I was like, oh, it's a good party movie. It's really funny. It's good vibes. It didn't quite play to everybody because I realized at the time, like, oh, if you have like 5 or 6 or 7 people in a room, they're gonna talk. They're not gonna sit and watch and listen to dialogue for an hour and a half. So it's not the kind of funny that's for a party movie. But yeah, that was the thing. Like, it's not really a casual viewing experience. You do have to actually kind of meditate on the movie. You can't just throw it on in the background.
I think it'd be a great movie to see in the theater where you are in that focus, pay
Yeah,
attention mode. And the best times I've had this movie is when I watched it like alone on a Sunday afternoon or at night on cable. And I
yeah.
paid attention to it, which I think hurt this recent viewing because I was making notes and trying to pay attention for this podcast, and I wasn't really watching the movie.
Mhm.
It was kind of like work. I didn't just sit down and say, "Hey, I'm going to watch The Big Chill."
Yeah, and that's I had that as well because it is very much like it's a vibe. You have to be in a certain headspace for the movie.
100%. That was the same thing with Crimes. A lot of the movies we're going to talk about this month, they're those kind of movies. You really have to commit to the movie emotionally and where you're at to have a good time with it, because these movies can fuck you up. All the ones we're
Yeah,
talking about. You can either have a good time or you can get, I think what
you
we
have a
had,
bad trip.
well, what I had with Crimes and Misdemeanors and now this movie, even though I had an enjoyable time watching it, they really screwed me up emotionally. I had a very depressing
Mhm.
experience with this movie. I found myself very depressed after this, and I felt very lonely because I thought this is what
Mhm.
adult friendships were going to be like. When Kevin Kline lays on the couch and puts his feet on, and they're all close, and I would see this stuff in movies and
Yeah,
shows when I was a kid. I thought, oh, when you get in your 30s, you guys are all going to be close like this with these
it'll
friends.
be like Friends.
Yeah, like college. And that's all just a lie. That's not what happens when you get older. Maybe it's our generation because we have
In the
technology.
movie, it's funny the movie even acknowledges that by showing that they're distant now, that they don't trust each other, they have issues and tension, and that the only reason they're together is because of this huge deal. It's really a tragedy that has to bring them together, and it still acknowledges like this is the fantasy fairy tale version of this kind of thing that you want from adult friendship, but
Well,
it still feels attainable in some way, even though it's not.
well, because adult friendships like this would be so much more crucial than teenage friendships.
You need it more.
Yeah, I need it way more now than when as a teenager, I almost wanted to be alone. I wanted to be left alone.
Exactly.
I wanted to be in my room by myself. I would love to have a group of friends now that I have like 10 years of history miss. I miss people. I miss so many people that I don't talk to anymore and we fell apart. You and I even didn't even talk for
Yeah.
a long time, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
I missed you during that time. Um and it's weird because some of the things in this
Post
intimacy,
COVID.
we used to lay in a bed together like this with people. Like we had
Yeah.
these nights like this where a couple of guys would be on the floor and like three of us
Yeah.
would be laying in a bed. And it was like this big chill thing, and I don't see any scenario where something like that would happen now.
No, it'd actually be kind of scary.
Yeah.
If I had some guy, like if I had like another guy in bed with me, and it's like two guys laying on my phone, like that's the scary. Like I'd be like, what happened? That what went so wrong that night?
That's the thing.
It's just a gay orgy in my
We used
bedroom.
to sleep in a bed together. I mean, it's just the truth of it. It's like because you were just staying at my place for a while, but we slept in, and I didn't
Yeah,
think anything weird about. And you weren't the only guy that happened with. I had other guys come over and they would sleep in the bed, or
yeah.
like a guy would
It's
crash on
funny
the
how this
floor.
probably comes off as like a way of like coming out of the closet slowly. We
Yeah.
used to stay in the bed together. It was natural.
Yes. Gay Chads. The last episode of this where they're just making out. Like we start reviewing Gay Kino, its Funeral Parade of Roses.
We're doing just it's a joke. We're just reviewing gay pornos for a month.
But you get what, but the sentiment though of like
Yeah.
you lose
Well,
it,
it's
you lose friendships as you get older. You don't gain more friends. You become very
yeah.
isolated, and maybe you have a spouse or somebody you've a relationship with. Maybe you have one really close friend that you see frequently.
And that's lucky. Like it's really like a thing. Right? If you have one good friend, you're
Yeah.
very fortunate, and that's something that you don't expect when you're young. You think you're gonna have a ton of friends in this crazy social life. It's gonna be like one of the shows you grew up watching, and that's not the case at all.
You just don't have free time. The reason you have that time for
Yeah,
friends when you're in your teenage or early 20s is because you have free time.
yeah, that's a lot of it.
But you know, if you're working 40 plus hours a week, you have shit to do. You don't have time to like spend 2 or 3 days hanging out with people.
With our generation, you can't even balance a relationship around a work schedule.
No, it's becoming very well. That's the thing I wonder about too. Maybe this was how it was back then because people had more time. I don't know. They might have had more free time back then than we do now.
Yeah, it would be funny if like you go in a time machine back to like the era this is from, and you realize like, oh no, everything was better and they were the best people ever. They were right.
I want to bring up the Meg character in this and how crazy her plot line is. Like, what hentai is
Uh,
this from? So she's a single woman and she's decided she wants to have a baby out of fulfillment. That's fine. So you would
mhm.
think maybe she would try to get a sperm donor. No. She's decided on this weekend she's going to have one of her male friends impregnate her on the first try. She tells Glenn
Yeah,
Close this, and she's going to ask the men throughout the weekend to have sex with her and give her a baby.
it's like a Nathan for you plan.
It's insane. Like when I first saw this as a
Yeah,
teenager, I didn't think too much about it, but watching it now, it's like even in the context of the 80s and boomers, this seems crazy.
She reminds me a lot of a close friend of mine that she has a baby now, but she really wanted one when she was single, and I could see her doing something like this.
Well, it's a well, like let's say like you want to have a baby. So, and this is, if we're gonna be honest, this is what a lot of women do: get pregnant. Who say like my birth control didn't work. They just let some guy they're
Oh yeah,
dating.
no, I know, I know it's
They let a
happened to
guy.
people all the time.
Yeah, they let a guy knock him up because they want
Hmm.
the baby, and then they usually become a single mom.
Which I think it's a form of rape. It's a non-consensual form of sex because the guy's not aware. He doesn't consent to taking that risk. I think it's maybe rape's not the right word for it, but it's non-consensual sex at the very least.
Well, if you're lying about your birth control use or what your intentions are, there is some form of non-consensual sex to that for sure. And I'm not saying this.
Exactly.
I'm not saying this out. I'm not talking out of school. Like I know way too many stories of this sort of thing. I've been told by women who have
Yeah.
done this sort of thing. My sister did this. Not to throw her
Hmm.
under the bus, my sister did this. She wanted a baby with the guy she was dating. And you went to, what is with your light, man?
I told you it's because I'm using the shitty outlet today. So like anytime that like my foot touches a wire, it forces it to go out for a second.
But my sister, she had the baby, and everyone in the family was like, "Oh my god, it went out again." This episode has
All
so
right.
many technical.
If it happens again, I'm just gonna put in another outlet.
But my uh, she had a baby, and I love my nephew. He's amazing. But she had a baby, and at the time, it was like, "Oh, it was an accidental pregnancy and all that." And then she basically told us like a couple years later, like, "No, I just quit taking my birth control pill, and I wanted to get pregnant. I did it on
It happens all
purpose."
the time.
And if you ever bring that up, people say, I used to get fights like, "How dare you? How dare you say that birth control, which is like 99% effective, does it not work these certain times?" I'm like, yeah, how dare you be an idiot and act like women aren't capable of lying about something? That's sexist in a sense because you're saying women aren't
Yeah.
cunning enough or intelligent enough to come up with a plan to do something like
Well,
that.
it's just a shit test of so many things in life where this thing is clearly happening, but if you acknowledge that it's happening, you're in the wrong.
Yeah, that's why I always wore condoms, even though I didn't want to. I'm not playing that game.
I've just never had sex.
You got it figured out.
There's only one way to ensure not
But it's
getting
just a weird
STDs for
plot
children.
line. Like she asked William Hurt to
Yeah.
knock her up, and he has ED from, I guess, Vietnam, is what's
Yeah, I think
implied,
it's implied he's in the war.
and it makes his dick not work.
Or he's just so sad about Alex that he can't get it up.
But she asked him. She asked the Tom Berenger character. There's actually a really funny moment where he's like, "You want me to do what?"
But there's a great thing where like he explains to her where he's like, I can't do this. There's more to just knocking you up. I couldn't do that. And she says, "You're a good person." And they kind of like hug, and it's very sweet. And he says, "So, you want to fuck?"
He's an incredibly likable character in this movie. It made me really like Tom
Yeah.
Berenger. I thought Tom Berenger really stood out for me. I mean, my favorite character and performance, and we can talk about it more, is William Hurt as Nick. And I think William Hurt's one of the
Yeah.
best actors of the 80s. And he's in Lawrence Kasdan. He's an accidental tourist and body heat in this. Um, but I gotta say, yeah, sleeping on Tom Berenger, even the mustache and his big head of hair. Uh,
Yeah.
I just thought Tom Berenger he does come across as a good guy in this. Even
Yeah.
though he does some morally questionable things later on, I don't think it's totally unjustified. I think there's something kind of sweet and romantic about it. There's a yearning in this movie
You
for
can
it.
tell he's conflicted. Very, he wants to do the right thing. He tries to be a good person, but then he also has this kind of weakness and almost cowardice, really.
Well, it's humanity though too, because he's a really
Yeah.
good looking guy, so women like him. You know, there's that aspect to it too. Like Tom Berenger was a major sex symbol at the time, and he's kind of, you know, you could tell that he doesn't like the show that he's doing.
That's one thing I wanted to bring up that really stood out to me is when they watch the intro to the show and they're making fun of it. It's basically like an episode of Mystery Science Theater, real quick, within the show. And it's the first example I saw, maybe the most realistic example of people hanging out making fun of something on the TV.
Yeah, there's a lot of groundbreaking things in this movie. There's the video camera thing, which is straight up sexualized videotape. There's no way Steven Soderbergh didn't see this movie and that wasn't
Mhm.
an influence on it. Because not in the sense that you're filming this stuff, but that people are watching it after the fact and that affects the relationships between the
Yeah.
characters. That element, people just watching the television and commenting on the thing. I mean, it's actually pretty crazy that they film a faux version of fake pair opening of
It looks real.
the JT Lancer show. And I would say, would you watch the show as a fan of a lot of 80s shows like Quantum Leap? I think I would. JT Lancer looks pretty
Yeah.
goddamn good. Looks like a fun ass show. He's in the bed with the women and he's
I was
like,
gonna say the final shot.
no, it's amazing. Like that's the thing. I can't think there wasn't. I mean, they did this in some movies, but the show within the movie sort of thing, the fictional
It just looks
universe
so
thing.
authentic.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's one of the most clever things because they talk about the show, but you don't think they're going to do anything with it. But the fact Lawrence Kasdan actually filmed that, it's like Tarantino or something.
Yeah.
And it's like dead on aesthetically. It looks like a real show. And you could buy him. He would totally be a guy that would be on the show like that. It doesn't seem out of place that he would be
Yeah.
this action cop character on a TV show. He has the charm. Because the way they talk about it sounds like he was the guy at the college campus that was giving speeches and was like a charismatic figure. And then he became this, TV actor. And
Yeah.
and I just really like this character. I feel like Sam's his name. I feel like Sam in a lot of ways was the one that was being the most introspective between the main men in this.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of contrast between him and William Hurt's characters, where they're almost the exact opposite.
Yeah,
Because
and a
William
lot.
Hurt's like dead to the world rather than being a celebrity. He's like a drifter, and they're the ones that have the big tension and the climactic scene of the movie, and their
Yeah,
different interpretation of events and how to respond to them.
yeah, I can't wait to talk about that scene because I think that's the best scene of the movie. I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
that right now. I think that's the best scene. A little thing I want to bring up here. We talked about the Sopranos thing with crimes and misdemeanors, and I've talked to so many friends
Well,
about
can I
that. So
guess what you're gonna say?
yeah, go ahead.
Because this is especially the scene at the beginning I'm going to bring up with Calvin Klein's speech where he can't finish it. I always think this is like 6 feet under, like a proto 6 feet under.
100%. That's exactly what I was going to
Yeah.
say. I think
Because
this.
I always think of David's speech at a funeral. I won't give it away where he can't finish it, and I'm like, oh, that's where they got that
Well,
from.
not just that, them hanging out in the kitchen
Yep.
and the
In the
vibe.
wake of death.
Yeah, this totally, and even more so than this, the film later that he made that's almost like a spiritual sequel to this, Grand Canyon, is very 6 feet under because it's set in LA. And when I first saw Grand Canyon, I mean, Grand Canyon's kind of a preachy, pretentious movie, but a lot of things about it, and I actually like that film quite a bit, is very 6 feet under aesthetically. But this is like proto that even. Uh, all I could think about this watching it, yeah, it totally the setting of it, that it was about death. There's comedy. It's characters with
Yeah.
history and I mean, Nate Fisher
William
wouldn't.
Hurt even feels like David.
Well, Nate Fisher wouldn't be out of place in this group.
No, he wouldn't.
Peter Krause as an actor wouldn't feel out of place in this. Or yeah, David, Michael C. Hall wouldn't feel out of place with these characters and stuff like that.
Ruth even kind of feels like Glenn Close's character in a way where it's like a crazy woman. It's very like reserved.
Yeah, no, and 6 feet under, both one of our favorite shows. I mean, so that I think that's part of the appeal of this movie too. I think it kind of created its own sort of genre that got developed later into like HBO television shows. Because now this would be more of a television show than it feels like a TV movie on some level, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
It feels like a Netflix or Hulu original.
yeah, it's. I'm glad you thought that. Yeah, I totally think it's like 6 feet under. So William Hurt's character throughout the movie starts to have a relationship with the Meg Tilly character that's hinted at. So I
Mhm.
bring up the whole thing about big chill in your bro. So this is okay. So the idea of like, if your friend dies, what's the line here about how long you wait? Because Jeff Goldblum's hitting on her and they're all criticizing that he's doing it. I mean, he's being a real pig
Yeah.
with this girl. Like every scene with him and her, and they're like, "Oh God, she's a kid. This is wrong." What's the line here when your friend kills himself before you like make a move on his hot like 22-year-old girlfriend? You wait a day, a week.
I think you should wait until the funeral's over, which Jeff Goldblum fails to do.
Yeah, no,
No, I think off
he's
limits.
excited immediately.
Yeah.
The
Well, I
funeral.
think that is the difference. Is that Goldblum he's just a pervert. He's going at
Yeah.
every woman he can. Whereas it seems as though William Hurt develops a real connection with this girl, and that's what gives him the pass. But I would say in real life, outside of Hollywood movies,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're friends with a girl, that's it. You just don't do it,
Yeah.
especially if he's dead.
Well, that's the question though. Does it mean anything if he's dead? Because
I think so.
if your friend's alive, right, it's a betrayal. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? But if the person doesn't exist anymore, cosmically, does it actually mean anything, or is it just your ego kind of fighting this feeling of guilt?
I think it depends on how much you value loyalty. Because it's like, does it matter if you break a promise to someone you made to someone that died after you made it? Because usually more people honor that more to honor their
Well,
friends. So
it's not like
similarly, if you break the bro
yeah,
code for your dead bro, is that worse?
but it's not like Chloe's his wife or something.
Yeah.
She's like a chick in her early 20s, you
Well,
know?
that's what makes it weird. Is it almost seems like she's just a girl that he was sleeping with more so than an actual um,
Totally.
relationship, even.
Totally.
And I think it's smart the movie does that. If she was his grieving wife, it'd be fucked up.
So there's a piece of casting here about the Chloe character that's very famous in the lore of this movie. Phoebe Cates auditioned for this role and was very close to getting it. This is like right before Gremlins. She met Kevin Kline during the audition. They got married. There's a quote that I love from Rob Sheffield. I think it's either in his book Dreaming the Beatles or Talking to Girls About Duran Duran, where he talks about this movie and the boomers acting like the 60s was the best music. And he says, he's like, with time, I've been able to forgive the boomers from the big chill. He's like, but I have not been able to forgive Phoebe Cates marrying Kevin Kline. Uh, I always thought about this fascinating because Phoebe Cates is one of the best looking
Yeah.
goddesses that's ever been in a movie. I think at Fast Times she might be the hottest chick that's ever been in a Hollywood movie. And I used to always think, oh yeah, Phoebe Cates should be in this movie. But on this watch, I think Meg Tilly is better for this role with the way she
I
looks and
agree.
acts. I think I would say like if you were gonna ask me like pick her or Phoebe Cates, obviously I'm picking Phoebe Cates like as a waifu. Uh, but I don't know if Phoebe Cates. I would have liked to have seen her do something like this. She never really played a part like this. Uh,
That's the thing, the eccentricities of the character, the fact that Meg Tilly, I mean, she's very attractive, but it's a little less conventional.
yeah, very. I found myself very when she started doing the yoga shit on the floor. I was like, holy shit! It
Yeah,
was it
exactly.
was uncomfortable. Like,
Yeah. And that's why like you get all these like old men kind of lusting after her and being conflicted because she looks that good. But and that's the thing for me is I'm just happy for her that she got this role because I always loved her in Psycho too.
yeah,
So like when I started watching this and she's in it, it was like really exciting because she's not the more known of the Tilly sisters.
there's a scene where Nick's character and Sam Tom Berenger, they're up and they're talking about the one I can't remember her name, but the one female character that Tom Berenger kind of has a history with, and Nick used to date her.
Yeah,
And the husband Richard, who's this kind of straight laced guy, he's just like eating in the kitchen. It's a wonderful scene.
yeah, it
Where
is.
they go and talk to him, and he kind of talks about their friend and explains things to him because you think this guy's one way up until that point from everything you see, and then this shows
Mhm.
the complexity of the guy in the scene, and he really makes these two guys think. He has a thing here about having kids in life where he says the thing is nobody said it was going to be fun. At least nobody said it to me.
He also talks about compromise and how you try to make as little as possible morally, but you're going to have to, and it's about minimizing selling out in that way, which applies to a larger theme about the boomer generation, but also just being a man and just having to deal with doing things you're not proud of to get by.
Richard's the most mature character in this movie.
Also, the bit about insomnia is a really great touch, I think.
Well, even that felt very 6 feet under. Even the scene with Meg Tilly
Yeah.
when they're all having the dinner, and then Nick says the thing about Alex would say, "Where's the dessert?" and she starts laughing. That's very 6 feet under. I could see Claire
Mhm.
doing that in that show. Very similar thing. I just want to bring up the Michigan thing in Ann Arbor. I lived in Columbus for several years, and I used to go to Ann Arbor all the time. And I love Ann Arbor, Michigan. They shot Scream 4 there. It was just cool for me that they brought up Ann Arbor, and they were watching the Michigan game. And yeah, I'm not from
Oh
Michigan or
yeah.
anything, but I have this affection for Ann Arbor. It's a really cool town, and it's a nice detail. I don't know. It gives us specificity.
Speaking of location, the field and all that, this is a great November movie aesthetically. I didn't think about it when I suggested it, but it really does have that like post October, late fall vibe, where it's not quite snowing yet. It's getting chillier, but there's leaves on the ground. It's not summer anymore.
Well, Kevin Kline's Southern accent, I gotta say, it comes and goes. It's a tough
That
one.
is funny. I'm not really great with identifying accents, so I don't notice, but
Well, I forgot that he had a Southern accent until I watched it this time. I thought it was just Kevin Kline's because there's scenes where he's talking where it just sounds like Kevin Kline, where he says
mm.
the like, I don't like you, and then there's other scenes where he's like, "I'll live here," and it's like, wait a minute, wait,
You get the fuck off my porch.
yeah, no, it like comes in and out. I thought that was weird because we're kind of not talking about Kevin Kline enough, and he's brilliant in this movie, but he has to.
Yeah, he kind
He
of ties the whole movie together.
he
Is
just
like not quite the Avatar, but the one you relate to the most.
he just doesn't get these dynamic parts so much.
No, he's the everyman, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, but from what I read, he originally wanted the Jeff Goldblum role. He wanted a more comedic role. He didn't want to play the more straight, boring character. But Kevin Kline's a wonderful actor. I think he's a very textured actor. He's given some of my. I think his performance in Sophie's Choice is like insanely brilliant, and I think about that character all the time. Where it's this guy that you think is brilliant and is warm and they love him, and then you find out he's just this insane guy and it's all a lie. And it's one of the most horrifying things I ever saw in a movie is finding out that guy, because he's like giving these big speeches about like this is going to be the next great American novel, and you're just so happy with those characters living in that house, and then it turns into such a tragic, dark story.
Well, that's the thing with like crazy people is that they could seem genius, like Charles Manson.
Hmm.
The family called him genius.
But I just, yeah, everybody's great in this movie, but I do think Kevin
Yeah,
Kline has a difficult role and he has
yeah.
to navigate it. And so it might be a little bit, you might overlook it when you watch the movie, but it's actually the subtlety of his acting is something that um, I think is underappreciated in a lot of movies.
One thing that's underappreciated in this movie is the paint on the van. And if he orders everybody a bunch of Nikes in one scene, which is kind of strange.
No, no,
There'll be a bunch of
he
shoes.
runs a shoe
Oh,
company.
oh, okay. Okay, I
I
guess I just missed out on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had to pay attention. I have the name here. Let me find it. It's called like Running Dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why, because he keeps telling everybody.
Okay.
That's a subplot in this too. His company's about to get bought by a major company, and he's trying to tell people to buy stock in it now. He told Alex that, and he's telling Nick that.
Yeah. Yeah, I picked
That's
up on that. I just never heard of what the company was.
they don't. I don't know if they totally outright mention it, but I saw that it was called Running Dogs, so that's why he gets William Hurt the pair of shoes.
Okay.
So he
That
open.
makes more
So
sense.
he has shoe stores, and they're about to get bought out. I want to talk about that real quick. I love the thing, although God, poor Kevin Kline having to wear those shorts.
I know.
It was hard because there's a lot. Even the last scene, it's like, dude, I see your dick this whole movie. And
It's hanging out of the side of the
no,
shorts.
I mean his balls are another character.
There's
Uh,
one ball in the left leg, one sticking out of the right
but he's
leg.
like jogging, and he like tells William Hurt like, "Hey, come with me." And then there's even a part where three of them are out jogging, and it kind of becomes like a running thing throughout a running theme throughout the movie. But I love it. At one point, William Hurt gets the shoes and he puts them on and he says, "I love these. I'll never take them off. I will sleep in them." And there's a cut to him like sitting at the cabin they have on their property, and he's just sitting there with the shoes on. It's pretty great. There's another scene where there's like a bat in the attic, and they all have to go take the bat
That is a
out.
really nice scene. The way they
Oh,
act
it's
about it.
they're
But I used to get
children. These guys are
yeah, I used to get
boys.
bats stuck in my house as a child. So it's just a relatable thing, like a bat coming in the house and like the man in the house having to go kill the bat.
Well, the moment that Kevin Kline's the most like what Kevin Kline's known for as a famous actor is in that scene when he grabs her and he has the racket or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, I will go up there and fight. That's very Kevin. That's like him in and out in movies like that, that he would be
Mhm.
famous. Or Fish Called Wanda. But I forget about that too. That's also very 6 Feet Under, like the bat. And it's just this whole sequence.
Yeah.
It's the bird in the 5th season of 6 Feet Under at the
Yep.
party. Uh,
Well, that's what's great with the movie is it's such a quaint film, but it has all these set pieces where it's like they get shoes, a cop comes, there's a bat in the house. Like a lot of things happen, but they're just minor things that would happen in a real day.
yeah, maybe it's a little contrived that so much happens in a couple days, but it's a
Yeah,
movie.
but it's a movie.
Why won't Meg have the baby with Jeff Goldblum's character? I found this very confusing. She's trying to have a baby, and then he's like, "Okay, I'll fuck you and get you knocked up." And then she says like, "Oh, we
Yeah.
have too much history, blah blah blah." It's like, so wait, every guy's okay. You need a baby except this one guy that's your friend. I just don't
I
think
always
I didn't think the writing sold that whole motivation there of why she wouldn't do that with him. I didn't really understand it. Why not?
Yeah, I always got it was the vibe of I think A was kind of like the comedic irony of the one guy that wants to do it, she doesn't want him to do it. But also, I always got the vibe like he's just like sleazy and want to fuck anything, and that to her felt perverse. Whereas like the sweetness of sleeping with Calvin Klein, um, it didn't feel like she was just getting like fucked. But Jeff Goldblum wanted to objectify her, and that put her off. Is how I'd always read into it.
I guess so. I just don't think it's very. I mean, it's just different takes, but I just don't think it. Her plot line's already weird,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think Lawrence Kasdan thought the storyline out very well. I'd say in general the women in the movie are a weak link. It was co-written by a woman,
I
but
would
I.
say in general, women are the weaker sex in this movie.
Well, because he makes Glenn Close's character. She cheats. She's weird. Meg just wants to have a
Yeah,
baby. Chloe's character is very weird and is a sexual object for a lot of it. The other character hates her
yeah,
husband. Is it wants to have an affair. You know, he's kind of putting women through this weird like sexual perspective where they're all like cheating.
yeah,
You know, and I don't know. It just I get having one character that way. That would be fine, but it's one of those things that's kind of aged a little bit. I don't think this movie's necessarily fair to the humanity of women. Uh, but also it's a different time. Maybe this was the dynamics of men and women coming out of the
yeah.
60s
I
and
was gonna say,
70s.
what humanity?
Yeah, I guess that's true. It isn't. I'm thinking in a modern context because obviously now some of this
Yeah,
stuff wouldn't. This isn't how you would write these characters in a movie
no,
if you were writing The Big Chill in 2022. So I wrote this down. The setup seems simple, like a play, but the structure and moving pieces end up becoming complex as the film goes to Breakfast Club. We don't get a lot of films like this anymore, where the
yeah,
writing and the structure of it has to come to sort of these emotional payoffs as opposed to uh, what I think now a lot of movies are is just like immediacy. It's like fast
yeah.
immediacy because they know people get bored a lot more of the time. Uh, yeah, this is more like a play. There's a lot of exposition and stuff through
It's a
dialogue.
methodical film.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that scene where they all go to the cabin and then Klein and Goldblum go out to walk, and then Chloe and William Hurt's character Nick are inside, and the
Yeah,
jacket. Uh, you just don't get a lot of scenes like that in modern movies, American
no,
films. Um, I've said this a lot about Ordinary People, the Robert Redford film, and I feel it's true of this film. I think the way a lot of people talk about these 80s movies like this and how dated and commercial they are, and they talk about the acting stuff, I've always thought a theory that if these movies were foreign films with subtitles, they'd be considered masterpieces. I think if like Ordinary People was a Swedish film and it was the exact same film with the same acting, people would call it a masterpiece. It'd have like 98% on
yeah.
Rotten Tomatoes. But the fact it's a American film, people are like, oh, this is like a television movie and the acting's really corny and it's like white people complain even though the acting is brilliant in Ordinary People. It's the same thing with this movie. I think if this was like a Japanese film about a group of Japanese friends getting together for a weekend,
With
like
the samurai, Kurosawa was the big chill.
well, I was thinking like Ozu, but that's but like
Yeah,
Ozu, but it was a contemplative film, like a guy commits suicide in Japan, and his friends come together, and it had the same level of acting in this. I think people would think this is a masterpiece because this
yeah,
really is world class acting in this movie.
yeah,
But it doesn't get that appreciation because people don't realize when they read the subtitles, it makes you have to do more work in your head. So the movie naturally feels more
yeah.
intellectual as experience. Because I fell into this trap as a teenager. I thought, wow, why do foreign films have so much better acting and character dynamics? But then you realize it's because you're reading.
You're distracted.
Yeah, you're not just
Well,
watching the
it's something
movie.
that we talk about a lot is like the Criterion children and how like they put these values in these superficial aspects of things that it's just kind of objectifying to film, really.
Led to the A24 generation where we're at now.
Yeah,
And we contributed to that culture. I would go buy the Criterion DVDs, but I do think
yeah,
Criterion ruined eventually art house cinema or how it was perceived.
yeah. I agree, and it also made it very it's very gatekeepery. Very like if you want to see this movie, you have to pay $30-$40 to see it, and there's like one day a year that you get it half off, and
Well, there's another scene that's really good. There's a dinner table conversation where they talk about Glenn Close brings up specifically, this is where the boomer criticism comes in a little bit more, where she talks about, I would hate to think that it was all fashion.
Mhm.
And they're like, no, we did change things. So then Kevin Kline says, so what? We were cool then and we suck now. But she says, I was just worried that it was all fashion, our cause. So this is the closest scene, I think, to it being like a commentary on boomers. You know, they're admitting in this moment, like, yeah, we changed things, we made a movement and all that stuff, and then they're they're saying essentially like, yeah, we're lame adults who are doing
Or
all
our
the
parents now.
yeah, and we didn't change the world, really. We didn't make it this
Mhm.
cultural movement. You know, we all work, you know, we're all part of this capitalist machine now. We're supporting it, we're feeding it, as opposed to you know, what they were claiming they wanted to do in the 60s. This leads to a very iconic sequence. I think this is probably the most iconic sequence, which is the kitchen cleanup and dance sequence with the song.
Mhm.
That's got to be the most iconic moment in the film, probably, that I can think of.
Yeah, it'd be up there. I think You Can't Always Get You Want might be more iconic, but it's definitely up there.
I think the song's more iconic. You can't always get what you want, but I think the scene of them
Yeah,
dancing in the kitchen's the most famous image of this movie.
it could be.
Well, it's one of the only times that there's sort of like there's really good blocking and mise-en-scene. This movie doesn't have a lot of that.
Mhm.
It's kind of very stoic, but like the timing of like they move up the salad bowl and William Hurt dives under the bowl and
Yeah. It's got a lot of movement in it. The film doesn't have much movement. Like they play football and stuff, but even that's very quick,
yeah.
coordinated shots.
Well, even that sequence, that feels like an influential scene. I can't think of how many 90s movies that have a scene like that.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know how many movies have a scene like that in the 70s.
Yeah, there wasn't one in Taxi Driver.
But you know what I mean, though? Like dancing to
Yeah,
a song and everyone playing
that's in the
off.
John Hughes thing. That's like every John Hughes movie has a moment like that.
Yeah, I think that John Hughes' influence from this is something that's like been really understated, like historically.
Yeah.
I mean, this feels like a John Hughes movie without teenagers.
Yeah, it does. If you wrote about adults, if you just slapped his name on the movie, people probably wouldn't tell the difference. Like the
Yeah.
average viewer.
Yeah, I think he may have saw this and said, and I don't know if this is true, but I feel like he saw this and said, "What if I do movies like this, but about kids now?
Hmm.
But it's what if the kids of the boomers are dealing with what they're going through, but I approach it like this?" Because there's a lot of 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, Breakfast Club, and all that in this movie. Uh, Tom Berenger has a scene where he talks about they're kind of just hanging out after the dance. Where he said, "I think I've been too slow to realize people our age doing their own stuff would be backstabbers. I figured because they looked and talked like us, they would think like us." I think that's still true now
Yeah,
as you get
yeah, I think it's
older.
more true now
Yeah,
with the and everything. How you can block someone that you don't like. I think that's really contributed to a lot more dogmatism in group preferences than there ever has been.
I like the play out over the weekend here. I like that the the first night they're kind of talking, then there's the party night, then there's the night like we're gonna get high, we're gonna get drunk.
Yeah,
Uh, William Hurt gives Jeff Goldblum a Quaalude. Was 1983 the peak for Quaaludes?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, we don't get that. Well, because Wolf of Wall Street really brought these
Yeah,
back to the cultural consent. Because, like, I don't think
yeah,
a lot of people knew about Quaaludes, but it's pretty. That's definitely like a thing like that makes this movie very much of its time. Is like, oh, you got a lewd?
yeah. No, it's a funny how it's a dated thing. Like before Wolf of Wall Street, Quaalude wasn't really in the public lexicon anymore. It kind
No.
of went extinct. And then because of that, you can watch a movie like this, like, oh, I know what that is. That's the drug
Yeah,
from
I
the
think as a
Scorsese movie.
teenager, I didn't know what the fuck a Quaalude was.
No,
I
I
tell
didn't.
people about it now they're young and they don't know what it is. I mean, it's not. I mean, it was kind of one of those brilliant things in Wolf of Wall Street where Scorsese was like, no one's really taken this angle with this drug. Everyone's made a cocaine
Yeah,
movie and a stoner movie, but nobody's been like, hey, there was one point in this country that like half the country was addicted to this thing and the government got rid of it because everybody was doing it. This is another thing about the boomers, how they lie to you as parents. Like, I try to tell people this all the time. They're like, my parents never did any of that stuff. It's like, yes, they did. Your parents were on Quaaludes in the 80s. They just don't tell you they were on Quaalude. They don't, your mom sucked a dick before she met your dad. It's just hard. A lot of people can't accept those things. When you get older, it's
mhm.
easier. But when you're young, you're like, because your parents lie to you about a lot of shit like that. They act like they were very
Yeah,
pure people. It's like, no, your mom was in a van somewhere sucking a guy's dick and then took Quaaludes, or your dad was snorting cocaine at a restaurant in 1982. You know, because they didn't know it was bad. You can't blame them. They didn't know.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing with so much of life that's funny is we act like children are pure. They're these innocent creatures, but really, kids are very selfish. They have no patience. They don't have this deep wisdom. Movies like to act like they have this just word. It's the opposite. Kids are stupid. They're selfish. They're brash. They're violent. And then you become a teenager, and you're still dealing with all this chaos. And adulthood's making order out of the chaos. And what's funny is the theme of this movie, so much of it is like you tell they have like chaotic, anarchist almost youth, and then they made order of their lives, and they want the chaos again. They want to have affairs. They want to do quaaludes. They want that excitement of being young, and they're all reconnecting with people going through the same thing, having the same existential crisis due to the death of someone that they mutually know.
Very relatable. It's those nights that you still have occasionally as you're older where you're like, I'm going to drink a bunch of beers tonight. And then you get fucked up and then you want to do anything to kind
Yeah,
of recapture what it used to be. And I've had these nights. They don't happen often, but I've had those nights where you just go down that dark path. You stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning and you're trying to party like
yeah,
you're a kid again. I think that's an astute point. I do think it's like they're trying to kind of capture youth again in that sequence, that whole
yeah,
stretch. Let's talk about him because I've been ignoring him a bit. I think we want to be like the Kevin Kline character, the Tom Berenger character, but the character I find the most relatable in this, the person I think really stands out in the movie, and I don't think is aged in a way like a lot of this other stuff has, is William Hurt as Nick. He is phenomenal. I can't believe he didn't get an Oscar nomination. Honestly, it's a it's. I think it's the most interesting character in the script. I think his performance is intense. I I don't know the guy. He's got drug problems. He's got Vietnam. He used to be a radio host. There's a scene where he talks about guests used to call and he's interviewing himself. Chloe's listening, and then she reveals later she used to listen to his show and called in at one point. He, I think, is dealing with Alex's death, maybe the worst outside of the Glenn Close character. Um, it's clearly really fucking him up. Uh,
yeah.
He's the one
It's
that's.
probably he's got survivor's guilt, which I think ties into the war thing too.
I agree. Well, also he's the one that the rest of them are kind of acting normal about it, or kind of being sort of. There's generalities with it, they're like, yeah, I loved you, or we did this
Yeah,
thing back in the day, very obvious dialogue. Nick's dialogue isn't obvious like that. Nick's a complex character, and the lines he get are very
yeah,
nuanced, and uh it's just William Hurt is a powerhouse in this movie. It slowly builds, but as it starts to pay off, and even the end of the movie where his character ends up and sort of the decision he makes at the end of it, I think is the most interesting journey anyone has in the movie.
yeah. Well, I always think about what the one character says to him in the climactic scene. She's like, "What happened to you?"
Yeah, that sequence
It's
that sequence is just fucking amazing. I mean, we'll skip over some other things real quick. Like there's a sequence that's really fun where it's doing all these fades of everyone in the kitchen the day after they all party. And then
yeah,
it ends with Jeff Goldblum like, are we the first ones up? I think that's a really fun sequence. Um but yeah, I want to talk about that scene. The whole movie builds up. They kind of try to get along with each other. They have fun times, they deal with depressing things. Then it all builds up to this confrontational moment where they're all in the room together. And Nick starts to talk about suicide as like a positive thing. Like, well, maybe Alex doing this was a favor to us. Like, he didn't have to put us through this bullshit. And then they all start kind of arguing with him about it. He's actually trying to have a deep conversation about suicide and the meaning of life. I don't think he's just being an
yeah.
edge lord.
I think he's just in such a different place than them that he can't communicate it.
Well, that whole thing. Well, when he starts kind of going on his rant, and then Tom Berenger says, like, save your deep bullshit, don't talk for me, and then Goldblum's great in the scene. It actually kind of reminds me of the sequence in Jurassic Park where they're at the table. Uh,
Mhm.
they kind of start. This is the moment that they stop having fun and they're actually having an adult intellectual conversation in the movie.
What's weird is the last time I watched a movie, I realized that they've been avoiding this conversation the entire movie. Now they're finally having it.
Yeah, and it's hinted at a little bit. Tom Berenger's like they're
Mhm.
running at one point. He's like, "Why is it every time we bring this up, we don't want to talk about it?" But this is the moment that it's like we need to get this out because it's like the last night they're all going to have together.
Exactly. It's like a chore you're putting off before your parents come back home and they're like, okay, this is our last chance. We have to get this done if any of us are going to get any kind of closure. And it kind of gets messy. It doesn't even resolve that much. It actually asks a bunch of questions and doesn't give the answers.
Well, Nick's the aggressor in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that's like, "Fucking, I'm pulling the cork out. We're going into this."
Yeah.
And the Tom Berenger character, it's really a dynamic between the two of them in this sequence. It's sort of the two ideals because Nick used to date the girl from the past, and then Tom Berenger likes her now, and he liked her back then. So they have tension in that. Um, there's a part where Goldblum's talking because I think William Hurt's phenomenal in this scene. I think this is the best performance in the movies in that scene where he just like looks at Goldblum and he's like, "You're so deep,"
Yeah.
and he keeps pushing it where he's just like saying stuff that I don't even disagree with, maybe with the concept of suicide or how you think about death and all that. That thing he says that, you know, we're all alone and we're going to get up
Mhm.
tomorrow and it's going to start over again and we're going to be alone and we're not in a
Yeah.
group and this is all bullshit. And then Berenger says that thing to him about, you know, hey, we were all friends. We go back. I'm not going to ruin that because you're high. And he says, wrong. You knew me for a short amount of time and you don't know anything about me. And it's true.
It takes me back to we talked about this I think last time we recorded, but it wasn't on the recording. It was about Bender not aging well in The Breakfast Club, and William Hurt's clearly the Bender in this movie, but done right.
Well, he calls out the hypocrisy of the other characters and what they're
Mm-hmm.
not willing to face, which is kind of Bender's role in the Breakfast Club, but done poorly. But him confronting them in this sequence, I mean, I think it's the best written sequence in the movie. Even Kevin Kline and Glenn Close on the couch, and it's like, well, tonight's going to be interesting, and everyone's like, let's not do this. And like you said, when she says to him, "What happened to you?" I don't think the other characters are justified in their reaction to Nick. I think they're all trying to be like Jeff Goldblum's trying to intellectualize and explain it. the one, then she
Yeah.
tries to guilt trip him, like, "What happened to you? You're being such an asshole." They're talking about it very shallowly. He's actually really trying to talk about the thing, I think, the Nick
Mhm.
character. And
Well, that's
it's
what's kind of interesting is they all have their own bullshit in how they're approaching it. Where William Hurt might be doing it in a way that might be kind of rumination or self harming, where you could even see him contemplating suicide himself and having to deal with that through his friend's death. So they're all kind of speaking from their ego rather than their heart. They're not actually connecting or having a productive conversation. They're all just kind of playing to their own weaknesses in this scene.
There's another scene. It's after the football game. We talked about it with the cop showing up. This is Kevin Kline's best scene. After Sam does the thing of the car and he hurts his arm,
Mm.
Kevin Kline takes Nick over to the side, because this is kind of what's wonderful about this movie is it feels like a conventional film about these things, and then it'll have these little asides where you then get a serious moment where the characters aren't. It's when they feel like adults. Kevin Kline says to him, "What is with you? Is jail another experience you want to try? See what it's like? I live here. This place means something to me. I'm dug in. I don't need this shit." The line "I'm dug in" fucking floored me on this viewing.
Yeah,
I mean, the relationship between those two guys, and he's like, "Hey man, like, okay, I get you're dealing with your shit, but like I have a life here. I've built this. I've become this person,
exactly.
and I'm all in. I can't get out of it. I've committed to it." Which is like
Hmm.
when your friend ends up in a relationship, having a family. I've had this with a lot of guy friends being in a relationship where they still want to hang out and come sleep on your couch, and they can't acknowledge the fact that you're in a serious relationship and this is pissing off your significant other or fucking with your
Yeah,
life.
especially like the friend that's getting the cops called for making noise and disrespecting your home environment and all that,
I'm bringing
and the difference of
cocaine.
like, yeah, exactly,
He's got a brick of
because
cocaine in his car.
they used to party together in college, and then one of them grew up and the other didn't.
Yeah, because he said to him, he's like, "Why are you friends with cops now?" Kevin Kline's like, he saved this house from being broke into 2 times. He's a good guy.
Hmm.
This is my community. This is my life here. This is the area I live in. You're just here to visit, and you're fucking with me.
Exactly. He's
That's
punching holes in his wall.
that's a powerful scene. So let's get to this point. When is Pennywise going to show up in this movie?
Yeah, I
Uh,
guess there's a lot of deleted scenes with Tim Curry in it.
this is literally it with the adult things. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's just
crazy
obvious.
how similar it is. It's insane.
Even the woman who wants to have the affair, she's clearly Beverly.
I mean, I couldn't believe
They eat
how
Chinese and talk about fortune cookies. They're all successful.
this is the movie that I wanted It Chapter 2 to be, or the TV movie. I mean,
Yeah,
with this level of acting and writing, but like it's a
regrouping for the suicide of their friend.
yeah, no, it even starts in the bathroom. I mean, the guy kills himself
Yeah,
in the bathroom and writes it in the bathroom. They're in the bathroom. A guy kills himself. They all get together and they're dealing with this past trauma. The location they're in and where it looks like it. They all have the dynamics of the characters from it. I mean, it blew my mind. I literally, if Pennywise had showed up, it wouldn't have been that crazy.
no, not at all. What's been throwing me off, not just that element, which is really funny,
Yeah.
but I even think about like the character dynamics a lot, and it's interesting where they function like a color wheel, where some characters complement each other, some completely contrast each other, and others are just kind of next to each other. Like Jeff Goldblum and William Hurt really don't do that much together. They play off each other a little bit, like some colors might. It's not like, red and green, which would be like William Hurt and Tom Berenger.
Yeah, no, I just couldn't stop thinking about like the adult scenes of it in this movie. I mean, it was funny.
Yeah.
But I thought that, and then you texted me and you thought the same thing. I mean, and I texted it to a friend. I go, "Hey, what's Pennywise going to show up?" And he's like, "Oh, fuck you, Jesus." Because it's so dead on. If you've read the book or you've seen any of
Yeah.
the stuff, this is like,
The
it
scene where they have to have the orgy in order to defeat the evil of the house.
They do what's it called, chewed or whatever,
Yeah,
chud or
yeah. I don't know what that is like the process of chud or whatever the fuck.
yeah, they have to perform chud.
I
Which
love that
is
like book nerds talk about that scene like it's like some literary classic moment or something. Like, oh, you got to talk about the ritual of chud. And it's like this is just some crazy thing that a perverted cokehead wrote while clearly in a fever dream of drugs and alcohol. Like,
well
why are
speak
you talking about this like it's Shakespeare?
well speaking of that, I have a thing written down here. Everyone in this movie's a pervert.
True.
These are some perverted
Yeah.
people. Like everybody's fucking each other, infidelity through the roof. Like I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, they're basically all just in like a big group relationship with each other.
Yeah, it's like it is that Friends thing where everybody in Friends. Someone said to me years ago as a joke, he's like, "Why is this show called Friends? It should be called Lovers." It's everybody's just fucking in the show. Um, but yeah, like everybody, there's an affair. Tom Berenger has an affair with the woman. Uh, Jeff
Yep.
Goldblum's trying to bang everyone. William Hurt ends up kind of having like a relationship with
You
Alex's
know what?
ex. You know.
You know what Jeff Goldblum is in this movie? I figured he's a little chihuahua that keeps humping every woman's leg. That's what he is, and they keep kicking him away the whole movie. That's his dynamic.
Well, that scene with Glenn Close later, where he's like, I think I feel sex in the house. And he's like touching her feet and stuff, and he's like leaning in, and then she's like, "What about the nightclub?" And he's like, "Fuck the nightclub." The nightclub thing's interesting. That he's like trying to
Yeah,
do the. He's trying to stop being like a basically a tabloid
journalist.
journalist. You know, like
Yeah,
a gossip columnist in a sense. He complains about it. He's like, I have to write something that you can read on a toilet, and they're like, well, you can read Dostoevsky on the toilet, and he's like, you can't finish it on a toilet. Um,
it's almost like he's trying to do something legitimate or real, but it's like a dance club. Like his
yeah.
maturity really isn't that mature. It's like a college jock would do. Like, what do you want to do when you graduate? I'm going to start a nightclub. It's going to be awesome.
So I just wanted to mention this real quick. The music cue. This is the second time we've talked about a movie that uses Bad Moon Rising.
That is really funny. I noticed
Yeah.
that on this watch too.
Yeah, because we talked about it so much before, and they're in the car, and it comes on, and I was like,
Really funny use of the song in this movie too, where like it's like playing on the radio and they comment on seeing them live.
yeah. Um, so we talked about this a little bit before. I think if there is a flaw with the movie, it's kind of not confidently directed or dramatically shaped. I agree with you; it has a great screenplay and a great actors, but I do wonder if like Rob Reiner directed this. Cameron Crowe a few years later. Obviously, he wouldn't have directed in '83. Um, it's an interesting thing about Lawrence Kasdan. Body Heat's a pretty stylistic movie, but a lot of his other films, like Silverado or Accidental Tourist and so on, I Love You to Death. Uh, it, I don't know. I do wonder about this if this movie would have benefited from just more of a director with this screenplay and with this cast if it could have, because a lot of these things that
Yeah.
are just kind of weird things we're talking about, I think a director could have kind of figured out some of those things and made it work a little bit. I don't want to take Lawrence Kasdan off of his project or anything like that, but technically as a filmmaker he is sort of lacking, and this is prominent throughout his whole career.
I was wondering too, because I was paying attention to that last time I watched it, how much credit should be given to him for the cast dynamic, the casting decisions, the comedic timing and the tone of the movie's great. And so I don't want to completely remove tone or remove credit from him because he did accomplish all those things which make the movie work. Like the script probably wouldn't work if it didn't have those people saying it the way they did, the way it's cut and edited. Which I know that he didn't personally cut the film himself and all that, and he didn't say the lines, but he didn't get it all to happen by directing it. Um, so I wonder if he is a kind of actor's director
I mean,
more so
john
than a
john
stylistic camera one.
john Hughes isn't far off from this. Breakfast
Yeah,
Club
I
isn't a
agree.
very well directed. I mean, they even talk about it. He didn't even set up shots. He would spend time with the actors, and the DP did most of the work. Like Tak Fujimoto did most of the work with the camera setups and shooting on Ferris Bueller. which is in a lot of ways visually his most like cinematic
Yeah.
movie. But he's got the guy who shot Jonathan Demme films. I mean, Jack Fujimoto did Silence of the Lambs, so he's got a pretty goddamn good cinematographer. Um, and I like this. This is something about 80s movies. A lot of them have this element. A lot of the Friday the 13th movies are like this. It's more just kind of about like hanging out and vibes. It's not really about like craftsmanship.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, like, because I think about a movie like Stand By Me, I do wonder if a director like that, could this be even more of a great film if it sort of had uh just that the high quality, maybe not a
Yeah.
Spielberg, but like Robert Zemeckis' The Big Chill or something. Because I think he could have
Right.
got the comedic timing down if he'd have done this before Back to the Future or something. So this is a big key thing that has to be talked about. This is the most famous thing about the lore of this movie. The first thing they shot was a key flashback scene in Atlanta that Lawrence Kasdan always intended to be the ending of the movie. And this goes back to the film kind of lacking dramatic shape. It was a scene that showed all of the friends, including the deceased Alex, that was played by Kevin Costner, back during their college days making Thanksgiving dinner together. It was intended to depict how all of the friends were back then and finally show Alex in contrast to how everyone's memories of him. So I find that part interesting. They all talk about Alex and have a feeling about him. I think why the scene would have been crucial is we could have seen how Alex actually was as perceived as they all view him
Yeah.
now. Uh, Lawrence Kasdan cut the scene. He didn't think, they all said in interviews that, well, you build this character up so much, it's better for it to be a mystery, and, paying that off would, nothing would live up to it. I would agree with that when I hear that, but it's Kevin fucking Costner.
That is the issue because I get it.
Yeah.
It seems like when you're developing a project, it's one of those things like this is going in the movie, this has to be in it. I'll die on this hill. And then when you're looking at the completed project and what it's become in that creative process, you're like, oh, actually, this hook that got me through all this is actually hurting it. I need to take it out. It's that cliche, kill your darlings. I get that. And I can totally see that being the case. And I do agree that like building this character up, how could he live up to everything? Like the mystery of it kind of makes a movie richer in a lot of ways because you're asking questions. So giving the answer, how do you amount to that? But getting Kevin Costner is a pretty good way to do it.
That would be my counter to that, is how do you live up to that? Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
I mean, well, this would be my counter to what Lawrence Kasdan felt. We brought up 6 Feet Under. One of the great things about Six
Yeah.
Feet Under is how it uses flashbacks
Right.
and
When the dad
fantasy.
was alive.
Yeah, and they do it throughout the show. They show the history of the character,
Mhm.
and it works. It doesn't hurt the show to leave those things open. It makes it richer. This movie builds up to a point where it feels like it's building towards something. And then there's the final scene in the kitchen. There's a nice moment where William Hurt goes over to Tom Berenger and they kind of make up silently for the fight they had. And then Jeff Goldblum makes a joke like, we're not leaving. And then the credits start rolling. And Roger Ebert even
Yeah.
talked about this, where he said that it feels like the film's building up and it goes nowhere. And then he says, well, I wonder if that's the point, the aimlessness of boomers. I do think if that scene faded then into the flashback, this would be a better movie. I haven't seen the footage,
That
but
is what I wonder too, is like maybe it just didn't because they're playing younger versions of their characters, maybe it's the costumes, it's awkward, they don't pass as, early
yeah.
20s kids. The writing may have not been good. There's a lot of factors I can see going wrong.
But on paper, I think that's the correct way to end the movie,
Mm-hmm.
is with the flashback. And with, I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's better. Like, if it wasn't Kevin Costner, but holy shit, if the last scene of this movie had Kevin Costner as Alex and then playing off him, and you see him for who he really is, and you see the dynamics, because the woman, she would be with Nick, then she wouldn't be with Sam.
Yeah.
I just think that'd be fast. I think it'd be the payoff to the movie, because it would be that reflection. They're reflecting on the past and who they are, and then just end with this beautiful moment. Because the movie starts with death, end the movie
Yeah.
with life.
Well, one thing that I wonder about is what's funny is the Thanksgiving component with crimes and misdemeanors with Hannah and her sisters ending with Thanksgiving and beginning with it, but also it's a lot of responsibility for one scene. to capture and redefine all these dynamics in one scene to introduce a new character and hopefully show his dynamics with all the other characters in one scene. Like maybe he has a moment where like he secretly, Glenn Close's hand touches his in secret or something, and then you find out that he's got tension with this character or that. It's a lot to do in a single scene. So like, how long was it? Was it 5 minutes? Was it 3 minutes? Was it 20?
It was 10.
Okay, yeah, because and that's a lot even for 10 minutes. So it's hard to say without seeing the footage, and that's where Criterion like their release really, and maybe they couldn't get it. I get that. Like Blue Velvet had 50 minutes of deleted footage. If the Big Chill, I think Breakfast Club's Criterion actually had a lot of cut scenes as well from the 3 hour cut, if I'm not mistaken. The Big Chill, if it had the alternate version with the original ending, that would have been a huge selling point.
Well, Lawrence Kasdan's never shown the footage, and people have asked for it. My only thing with this is like the things you're saying, I agree with, but I think from the quality of this film and Lawrence Kasdan as a writer, I do think he pulled the scene off. I do believe that he had that stuff work. I think he got nervous, and then I don't think he realized what Kevin Costner was. I think it was just a timing thing. Because how would he know in 1983 that Kevin Costner was going to be Kevin Costner?
Right.
He probably just thought, hey, this guy's really good and charismatic and likable in this. He worked with him later in Silverado. They did Wyatt Earp together. I just don't think he knew that it would age this movie. I think this movie would age better if it did have Kevin Costner in it too at the end. I think because because the mystery part of it, that's almost sort of like a flaw of the movie in a sense, because like I think we almost need a juxtaposition, not throughout, but just at the ending there. That is the dramatic payoff. Like if the whole movie's building up to a moment, that's the moment you're building up to, is that just kind of final, and then I think it would make the movie a lot richer too. I think it would make it a lot deeper. I think a lot of criticisms people have about this movie is because it lacks sort of a dramatic payoff and shape.
Well, that's what's so challenging about it, is that you see the risk of the scene not working, you see the reward if it pays off, and you trust Lawrence Kasdan and the cast enough to think it's going to work. But then also, should they be given the trust in saying no, it won't? And that's where it's conflicting, because if you can't see the footage, it's so hard to say.
Eric Stoltz in Back to the Future, it's like.
What about this? If there's a script online, because the script for everything's online with the original scene, then you can at least estimate it.
That's the thing. If I could see it or read it, then I could have a better judge. Because if it doesn't work, I would just agree. I'd go, okay, it doesn't work. But since we don't see it, I don't know.
Exactly.
But if you tell me about it, that sounds pretty fucking great.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring it up because it's a famous thing about this movie that Kevin Costner, he's even the body at the beginning. Like Kevin Costner's still in the movie. There's like a photo of him at one point, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm sorry, it's Kevin Costner. Don't cut Kevin Costner out of your movie.
Mm-hmm.
Bad move, Lawrence Kasdan. I like a line here by Chloe that I wrote down here. I haven't met that many happy people in my life. How do they act? That's a fun line.
Yeah. Well, it goes into that, like, the thing I always bitch with, the childish wisdom, where a kid says something profound and simplistic, but an adult saying it works. Like, it's a girl who's, like, seems to be autistic or something. She has clearly some kind of mental issues. Just making an observation like that, I believe it.
Let's just talk about where this pays off in that last scene where everybody's fucking. Glenn Close hatches a plan after hearing the Meg thing. She looks happily and smiles at one point with Kevin Kline's character. She decides that she wants Meg to get impregnated by her husband. And I used to watch this, and I forgot about the affair with Alex until this rewatch, because I hadn't seen this in years.
It's not really like it's hinted at, but it's only like a line or two given the whole movie.
That's it. It's like 2 lines. So Meg's trying to get pregnant. She asks all the guys, and then the payoff to this, and they play it like as a sweet, awkward moment. These 2 friends have known each other for years. She's like, you have sex with her and get this woman pregnant. Now, I don't know why it's not like just have him be a sperm donor. Hannah and her sisters has a scene like this. Why not just donate your sperm? Why does he have to fuck her?
Yeah, I always found that part odd. Why? Or they could just have a threesome.
That's the thing. That's the first thing I would suggest if I was the Kevin Kline
If I'm going to do
character.
this for you.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, if we're doing that, you should be there. Then it's cheating. Yeah, it's the weirdest decision in this movie. It's the thing that's aged.
Yeah.
It was weird when I first saw it, and it's weird now that a married couple, the wife decides to let her husband fuck their female friend, and not just fuck her, but get her knocked up. I have never met this woman in my life. I get that they were
Yeah.
hippies and stuff back in the day, but the only excuse is Glenn Close is crazy in this movie.
So I always thought, like, yeah, she's crazy. It plays that way. Where it's like she's just a weird fucking woman. But what I wondered on this recent viewing, focusing on the affair subplot, was if she's dealing with the guilt of the affair, and her having her husband do this is like you're in a state of shock because it's a suicide. It's someone she's close with, had an intimate connection with, and so she's acting irrationally, and she's also kind of being selfish, where it's like, oh, if I do this, larger than life gesture, then that absolves me of my mistakes in the past.
I felt that too, and that makes the ending really weird because you wonder what happens with this couple and their marriage after this.
She probably kills him and then herself and the children, and burns the house to the
Well,
ground.
it's crazy because they have kids together already, and then there's going to be this
Yeah,
kid that he had with
it's
this chick,
his,
and then they have this affair they're dealing with, and then
and the kid's gonna be around.
it's weird, man.
Yeah,
It's just fucking weird. I don't know I don't know where Lawrence Kasdan came up with this. I don't know if this actually happened in his
it
life.
is almost something that seems like that crazy, where it's like you hear that story. How do you just come up with that?
That's what I
It's
think.
almost like a
I
it's
do
almost like
think
Shakespeare, a Greek comedy, where it's like a woman
yeah.
goes to a party at her college friend's funeral and tries to get knocked up by a guy that she used to.
I've always said this. Kevin Smith made a joke once at a Q&A, and he's like, people think I was at chasing Amy, like, hey, let's fuck my girlfriend. I'm like, there's part of me that thinks that did happen, Kevin. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of me that thinks you did make that suggestion. I don't know, but it's like, I don't know how you came up with this at the same time.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe like he wrote his character into such a hole and he didn't know how to get out of it, and then he came up with like that's a crazy idea, or someone suggested it, where like the situation gets so out of hand that embracing the absurdity with an equally absurd solution.
well,
But
it's
this movie isn't absurdist like a Kevin Smith movie.
no, and that's the best writing and a decision in any Kevin Smith movie. Is that
Yeah, I
decision
agree.
in the third act. It makes that movie more interesting. But I don't even know how to go into it. I can't even explain it. I can't even fathom it. Like I've known my father had friends, and I've known these couples from the 60s that they're older and they're still nudists and they're still about, free love.
Yeah,
But I don't know if I can buy the Kevin Kline character doing this.
yeah, because he seems like a puppy dog through a lot of the movie.
Yeah, even his company, his shoe company's dogs,
Yeah,
I just don't see him being like, I'm gonna cheat on my wife. And like you brought up, it's interesting with the
there's all the
affair. It's like she thinks this is gonna make up for the affair, but it wouldn't.
right, and there's all these dog comparisons with Calvin Klein, but who would have thought he was a horn dog?
Well, I don't get why she just doesn't sleep with the Jeff Goldblum character and get pregnant. The logic of it's crazy to me.
Yeah,
Okay, I won't sleep with him because of history or whatever, but I'll sleep with a married man.
turns out that Jeff Goldblum raped her.
Well, that's the thing. They even implied that they did have sex back in the day. Those two characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't get, and the way they played up where Kevin Kline sitting in the robe and she comes in and he's like, we've had a lot of success in this
Yeah,
bed many times. It's so weird, man.
it's strange.
I mean,
I don't know how I feel about it. It's almost
I,
the thing. It's
don't,
like it's just weird. I don't know.
I
It's
can't.
just a weird thing in this movie.
I would love to, if there was any question I could ask Lawrence Kasdan, I would love to ask him what the fuck was going on with that idea and where it came from. It just is insane to me.
Well, I think Lawrence Kasdan has a lot of flaws as a writer people don't give credit for, or they didn't until the Star Wars sequels failed. But like, there's a point where ever since he was saying his original ending for Star Wars, where it was like, "Oh, Lawrence Kasdan was a genius. George Lucas ruined his good ideas." Kasdan's great. Kasdan's going to save Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and then we slowly realize like, oh right, that was never. I'm not saying he's like a worthless writer, but he's not this genius, perfect visionary.
I mean, he made Dreamcatcher.
Exactly,
You
the
know,
best movie ever made.
I mean, it is one of the funniest movies ever made.
Yeah,
But his whole career, like Wyatt Earp, like, you know, he has this run in the 80s that's, he's honestly one of my favorite writer directors just because of that 80s run, just body heat in this
yeah,
at Silverado, Accidental Tourist, and then working on Empire. But yeah, this is just a strange decision that has always put a bad taste in my mouth every time I've seen the movie, and even on the rewatch. I was just waiting for it the whole time. Like, okay, here we go with this storyline. It shocked me the first
yeah,
time.
yeah. I know it is shocking because you don't expect it. Why would
No,
you?
no, why would you
Why would
think?
anybody get that's what's going to happen?
Well, it just makes me confused about the Glenn Close character and who she is and what the fuck she thinks. Like, I have no idea what's going on with
Yeah.
this woman.
Well, she's very isolated from the other characters. Even like the way she's shot, usually it cuts to her rather than her being included. She's always like walking into the frame while everybody else is already in the room,
Sh-
and it's she's an interesting character that I almost wish they did more with her because I feel like I don't know her, whereas the other characters I feel like I know more.
Yeah,
From the moment crying in the shower at the end of the movie, I really don't think I know her anymore.
I agree.
Than
Very underwritten. Because she has that scene. She cries at the beginning when she finds out Alex
yeah,
killed himself. And then she's like in the shower. And then she has the scene at the dinner table. She's like crying throughout the movie.
hmm
And then she makes that decision. And Glenn Close is a phenomenal actress, and she's really good in this movie. I love that scene where she's in bed with Kevin Kline, where she keeps like hopping around the bed on him, and like he's trying
yeah,
to go
yeah.
to
Where they're
sleep.
fighting about letting people know about the business.
Yeah, but yeah, I really don't know who she is. She's a mystery to me in this movie completely. One thing I want to ask here, because we need to wrap up here soon. Where are these characters in 2022? Did they add each other on Facebook, and do they argue about politics and Trump?
That's what, yeah, it's the Richard Linklaters, the Big Chill. They
Because there's
follow up every 20 years. One of them commits suicide every movie.
well, there's no way that these characters
Yeah.
aren't like somebody became a Trump supporter at some point, and then the other
Yeah.
ones hate them.
I
Uh,
would say I don't think they keep in touch after this movie for the most part. I think maybe once or twice there's another Big Chill or two, but I think I always get the vibe that like they actually just kind of move on from each other after this.
yeah, it's like Sideways. It's sort of the end of a friendship.
Yeah.
Ooh, Sideways would be a good episode to do.
Yeah,
Um,
that'd be good.
Alexander Payne month. Uh, yeah, but I do think they probably don't ever get together in a group like this again.
Maybe one or two of them do and it's awkward.
Well, yeah, because you have a kid with one of them now. That'd be pretty awkward.
Gonna show up to the child support hearing.
Yeah, like you fucked up. But yeah, I just think now
She's
they
a
would.
lawyer too. He would just get fucked.
I feel like now they're literally like yelling into the ether of Facebook now, and they're mad
Yeah.
about the elections and all
Share
that
so
stuff.
many minions memes with each other.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think they're out of touch and sharing cringy memes on Facebook, and like, because that's what Facebook originally was. That's what blew it up. Was it was a way
Yeah.
for people to find people from their past and get
Yeah,
back
and share
together.
family photos and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what really blew up. It was originally for young people and like college age kids, but then it became a thing where older people were like, wait, I can search this person I haven't talked to in 25 years, and like I can see what happened to their life on Facebook.
You realize some things are you better not knowing.
Yeah, because these are people I'm still friends with that I haven't talked to or seen in 15 years plus, and I still somehow know something about their lives or the version of their lives they
Yeah.
present to themselves because of Facebook. Although I know a lot of people right now just deleting their Facebooks.
Oh, yeah, I know that, or people who just don't use it. Like they may use Messenger, but that's it.
That's
And
all.
it's
Yeah. It should just be a messaging service at this point.
yeah. What keeps me is the groups. There's so many good like little subreddit type groups on Facebook or meme pages that keep me unfortunately stuck. But
My last question into the final thoughts here. Where do you rank this in Lawrence Kasdan's filmography, and just do you have any kind of final summarization or something about the movie that you would like to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to rank. Like, I don't consider Empire a Lawrence Kasdan movie.
It's not.
Yeah, because it's so collaborative and like same with like Raiders. I wouldn't give him the whole credit for it in that way.
It's a Steven
So
Spielberg movie, yeah.
right. So for me, this is like my favorite thing he's done. And a lot of it is just I watched it. And it's just you watch the right movie at the right point in your life, and you just connect with it, and it's just like one of the top movie experiences ever. So it's very subjective, personal, especially that first viewing more than anything. Even though I have movie doesn't get worse every time I view it, but it's never quite the same connection. But it was a very rare instance where you just immediately uh, appreciate and enjoy a movie more so than you do most things that you like in life.
I would say that Body Heat is better than this, especially from a directing standpoint. Um, I do think this is the most Lawrence Kasdan-y like script and thing he ever did. I think it's his most iconic work as a director. It's his most important film in a lot of ways. This and all the stuff we've talked about. This is clearly a very important American film that inspired all these other things. But I just think Body Heat's like so well directed, so sexy. There's that scene where they're having sex in the bathtub, and then they put the ice in the bathtub. Ted Danson's in it, and he drinks like iced teas and tap dances. Mickey Rourke's in it. It's fantastic. Kathleen Turner, that's who it is. Kathleen Turner's the character in it. She's never been sexier than she was in Body Heat. But I actually think in some ways I like Grand Canyon better than this, even though Grand Canyon has some of the cringiest dated stuff I've ever seen about race relations in LA. But I also just think it's technically Lawrence Kasdan's best made film, and I think it's got some great stuff in it. I guess I would put this at like it's always like a number 2 and 3 for me. But I really see his work as like at least this era of his work, I just kind of see as a collection. But I
Mhm.
agree with what you said. I think the first time I saw this movie, I really fell in love with it. I really had a great time. I really enjoyed it on that experience. And I don't know if I had that with any other Lawrence Kasdan movie like I did that first time.
Yeah, it's weird how for me so much my connection with the movie is nostalgia. A movie about nostalgia and like people connecting with people or trying to connect with people they used to be so close with. I kind of have that with the movie as well. Where every time I watch, I'm trying to engage with it the way I did that first viewing, and it's never quite the same.
Yeah, it's that kind of movie. It's not better every time you watch it.
Yeah, it's not better, it's not worse, it's just different.
Yeah, because there are some movies where they're just like rich, and every time you watch it, you get some. Like Pulp Fiction. Every time I see it, I'm not like, well, I've seen
Mhm.
this before. You kind of find a new thing about it. You're like, oh, I kind of like this scene more now than I like this scene that I used to like when I was younger. Um, this movie, I think a lot of the enjoyment comes out of it from a freshness to it.
That is the thing because it's an incredibly snappy movie. It's so quick witted. So the comedy really wins you over, and the dynamics and just the coolness of the movie really wins you over that first time.
There was shit. Let me pull it up again. Sorry, had my notes up. There's one more thing I want to talk about. The title. I think the title's great. If this was a novel or
Mhm.
anything, I think this is like one of the greatest titles ever. I always thought that the title meant the big chill. I thought it meant like we're all hanging out over this weekend. It's a big chill session.
Yeah, that's what I used to think, but I have
But
a different interpretation. It's probably less accurate.
well,
I think I'm more wrong now than I used to
I
be.
looked it up and read what Lawrence Kasdan said about what the big chill means because I love that title. I mean, it's just like it catches you
Mhm.
immediately. Like I think it's one reason the movie was really successful and 56 million in 1983, that's like $100 million movie now, especially for a film of this
Yeah.
scale.
We could just
Um,
you could imagine like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, we're going to see The Big Chill this weekend.
totally.
Honestly,
Yeah.
all the movie and TV show names that have gotten turned into bands, which I don't like that trend, because it makes googling that shit very frustrating. The fact that The Big Chill isn't some shitty pop punk band is astounding.
That makes me laugh because your favorite band to say anything.
Was I don't know
Uh,
what it is now. I don't know.
well, when,
That's a can of worms. That's a weird one. What happened there?
when I hung out with you more,
Yeah,
your favorite band was Say Anything. God damn it! I had it here in my note. Okay, Lawrence Kasdan said The Big Chill is about a cooling process that takes place over every generation when they move from the outward directed, more idealistic concerns of their youth to a kind of self absorption, a self interest, which places their personal desires above those of the society or even an ideal. So it's about a chilling period in your later years where you kind of lose your idealistic views of youth. You're not as radical anymore. You calm down.
That makes sense. That's far off from what I was thinking, but that makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that or consider it.
I didn't either. I always literally thought it meant just hanging out. What did you think it was?
I thought it was that, and then I started thinking about the death aspect and like the big chills and like that moment when something happens in your life that's life changing. You get this
Mm.
weird feeling. Maybe that's what the bit like it's a chill you get when you're in a state of shock, and it's all these people dealing with a collective trauma of losing this person.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the way he describes it, that's pretty interesting too, and I think that connects kind of to the universal thing of this as opposed to making it a boomer movie. Because I'm
Yeah,
definitely living through a big chill as I've gotten older for sure.
yeah.
I'm not
Well,
as
it's weird getting older and seeing your generation go through the same steps as all the others.
yeah, I know. Well, maybe that's part of the boomer millennial thing or the antagonism is that, there's the we don't like becoming them on some level or like sharing the struggles that they went through because you hope when you're the younger generation you're going to be better and change things, and then as you get older you realize the status quo and the cycle of things is like this cycle that keeps continuing on.
Yeah.
you know
Well, you kind of you become more self aware and you get to know your own size with age.
Well, you realize you're not going to change the world. You're not as significant, as important as you thought you were.
A lot of times, yours you don't want to.
Yeah,
We're like, I don't want this responsibility of the world. I don't
no,
want to make changes on this level.
I'm just trying to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah, and get through it. Yeah, I had a depressing viewing this time, but I still think this is a really important film. I still think it's a. I don't have a problem saying. I think it's a. I don't want to say it's I think it's a borderline great film. Uh,
Hmm.
I think it's a great screenplay more than anything else, though. And
Yeah, that's what always stands out to me more. That and just the cast.
the dialogue and the acting is what makes
Oh,
this
and the
worth.
music.
Yeah, the dialogue and the acting is what's what makes this worth watching. This is there all those lines we read throughout. There's a lot of amazing one-liners and just kind of speeches or moments between characters, and everybody in this gives a really good performance. There's not a bad performance in this movie.
Yeah,
It's an awesome film in that sense. If you like movies like this, maybe if you're younger, you think you won't like a movie like this, which I could see. But I liked this movie when I was younger. So I think there's something here. I think there's something here that like kind of connects with people about the the big thing when somebody kills themselves, like when my friend did it, or other people have told me this subjectively, from their experiences. There's a lot of uncertainty and like questions left open, like why, or
yeah,
just to think that somebody got to that point that they were willing to do that is a really big thing to deal with. Like, because I've been as depressed or miserable as anyone else. I've thought about suicide before, and of course, but like the fact that somebody crossed that line, uh, I wish this movie explored that a little bit more, but it does explore it. It is a movie about, not just the growing up and kind of chilling out and all that, but there is this element of like the elephant of the room is the fact that this guy killed himself and none of them really understand it. And it's
yeah,
and it's fucked them all up.
yeah. And they're clearly trying to cope. Well, that's another factor with the party night where they're all drinking and doing drugs, and you think, oh, that's a fun thing, they're party. But you think about it, they were at one of their closest friends' funerals the day before. Now they're all drinking and doing drugs and fuck. And you guys are, oh, this is self-destructive. This is escapism because they can't confront the elephant in their room.
Well, it's like the lockdowns, like all we did that month when it first started, everybody got drunk all the time.
Yeah.
because we were all dealing with it. You have that moment of like, okay, it's like almost a freedom to do those sort of things, to abuse substances, is when something terrible happens or you're going through something traumatic.
It's like all we need is an excuse,
Yeah.
and then we just like
Well, because when you're young,
engage in our worst habits.
it's about the party.
Yeah.
It is fun, but as you get older, it is sort of that thing. You almost need that like excuse to be like, well, like I'm going to a wedding this weekend. I'm gonna get really drunk during the wedding because I have a hotel room and all that. But it is like an excuse.
Exactly.
It's like, oh well, they're getting married. We're celebrating their love, so it makes me feel justified and okay for the fact that I'm gonna go get really messed up. Although most weekends I wouldn't do that.
Hmm.
Or I got fired from a job couple of years ago, but I got fired and like they had to pay me for like 8 weeks after they fired me, and I just got drunk as shit for like 2 weeks. But
Yeah.
that was me dealing with like what I went through, the shock of that and all sort of things. So uh I don't know. There's a melancholy to this movie about that really surprised me on this viewing. It makes me kind of scared to rewatch this movie because I would like to watch this movie and just enjoy it, but it did make me really sad.
Yeah. It is a funny thing where you realize like, oh, it's a movie about a guy killing himself and people dealing with it. And you
Yeah,
don't think about it that way, but that's what the movie is.
yeah, and I think that's the thing that's aged the best and been the most human about the movie is I do think this movie is still relevant in the way that people deal with grief.
Mhm.
I do think this is how people deal with grief. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of emotions. You kind of distract yourself. You have outbursts with each other. I think this movie's seen as a film about, you know, that generation getting older, but I actually do think it's more about a movie about how you deal with sort of like, because the Alex dying represents the death of the 60s in that generation, is what I think. I think they're having to deal with
Mhm.
he's dead, so that does that mean that our ideals and what we stood for are also dead?
Yeah.
Um, all right, man. Cool. That was the big chill. I don't know how long we went. We had a lot of difficulties on this episode. The light went out a bunch of times. We had some audio issues.
Yeah.
The boomers tried to shut this one down.
They're
Uh
hacking us in real time.
yeah, they weren't having it. But yeah, you can watch this now on HBO Max, which was very convenient because a lot of the times when we do a movie, I have to go find it. Uh
Yeah, I just own it, so I looked out on that one, but
yeah, I almost bought the Criterion,
yeah, I got it on one of the sales.
but I just have this almost like anti-Criterion purchase thing right now.
I I have the same thing. I actually checked out the sale when I was Christmas shopping 2 days ago. And I was proud of myself. I got one, and it was just a Christmas present. I didn't get any for myself, and I looked through them, and I had the extra money. I'm working a ton of overtime. I was like, you know what? There's just nothing here that I really. Nothing here is going to make my life better. I'll watch it once. I might appreciate it, but it's no different than if I streamed any of these movies.
No, they really lost their allure. Like going to Barnes and Noble and
Yeah,
looking at Criterion's now as opposed to like 10 years ago.
it's totally different now.
No, I used to go and it'd be like, I want all of these, and just getting one was
Yeah.
exciting. And now I'd like look at 40 movies and I'm like, I don't want any of these.
I think their selections have gotten worse, and I think the competition's gotten too good.
Yeah. Well, they took so long to go over to 4K because their
Mhm.
transfers was what they were so acclaimed for. They don't have the best transfers anymore.
No,
They're not the leader in the game.
they
They're
have some releases that are honestly just not that great of transfers. Like even the Big Chill, watching it on the Blu-ray Criterion, like it didn't look that good compared to other movies that are much older. The Criterion's released, it didn't look bad, but
yeah.
considering how much it costs at like typical retail value,
Yeah.
it's pretty insulting, honestly.
Well, also just the fact that they're releasing like The Irishman or Marriage Story, these Netflix streaming. It's
Yeah,
like this is a streaming movie. Why are you putting this on Criterion? I can just watch this on Netflix. Why are you charging me $40 for this? Or Wally? It's like what the fuck is this?
yeah, exactly.
This doesn't make
Um,
any sense.
I give them some leniency where I think, well, they have to pay the bills, and something like The Irishman or Wally might sell enough that they can sell something a
I
little
don't
more
think it
risky.
does. I don't think people
But
are buying those movies on Criterion.
I don't think many people are, not those ones, like something like Parasite, maybe, where you could say, oh, well, it just won Best Picture. It's got a Blu-ray out. Why do we need this? It's like, well, it could pay the bills. A lot of people bought
Well,
that. I
even
get
when they
it.
released Blue Velvet, like I got it, but I'm like, did we really
Yeah,
need Blue Velvet on Criterion? Like Fire Walk with Me, that's
yeah,
cool. That feels Criterion. It used to be obscure movies that were hard to sort of find. And I've noticed this
yeah,
commercialist bent they've taken, like even like Bull Durham, which is awesome, or Fast Times at
yeah.
Ridgemont High. It's like I love you're celebrating it, but
Well, that's the thing.
it takes away
Fast
something.
Times, like Bull Durham, like that's forgotten now. People don't know what that movie is at our age, so I get it. And that is like a mainstream movie. I knew what it was.
Oh,
I
huge.
was excited and I bought it when it came out,
Huge
but
movie.
most people don't. I've told people about it and they don't know what it is. The Fast Times, yeah, it's insulting, or the Breakfast Club. It's like, what is this? I could buy this at Walmart for $5, and yes, it's a DVD in a lesser version. But I thought this was about film preservation. I thought it was about getting foreign films into America and all these other things. But it seems like at this point, you're just releasing movies so you can put your little C on the cover.
That's exactly what it feels like. Yeah, it's just to put the C on it and give some cred, and they're charging the same prices, and the special features aren't that great or the transfer, so I can't really justify.
Yeah,
Yeah, it should be a movie that there's never been a good release for, and then they release the good version of it. That's what Criterion used to be for me.
yeah, right. And well, like the Godzilla collection, that was hype. Everybody's excited for it. It has this gaudy, this almost like Andy Warhol type pop art looking, uh, I guess, cover, because it's also got pictures in it just looks corny as hell in my opinion and ugly. They're good illustrations, just not good for that collection. With like the original film Gajira, like that's not a silly, goofy cartoon movie. Some of them are, but that's not. So I don't think it's appropriate to make the entire thing this style. But furthermore than that, it's awkward. It's huge. Where the fuck do you put it in your home? And everybody I know who got it bitches about the quality of the transfers and say that it's not that good. So I didn't buy it. I was like, why am I going to spend $200 on this subpar product?
Yeah, it's sad.
Yep,
It's
but it saves me money.
well, it's an end of an era.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, we're in a different era of movies now, and even us doing a podcast on a movie like this, I don't know 20 years if anyone's going to talk about The Big Chill. I think we're going to be like the last,
Yeah,
you know,
which also makes sense because how many things last,
that's true.
40, 50 years and are as relevant as they were? Like eventually people aren't going to talk about Shakespeare anymore. They're going to phase him out of teaching him in schools and stuff, and it might be a thing. But even as popular as it is today, and as irrelevant as it seems today, it's going to be doubly so in 30 years. Something like To Kill a Mockingbird, we were alive when Harper Lee was alive. In
Hmm.
100 years, even 50 years, that book's not going to be talked about as much.
Also, sometimes some things do better. I love this movie, and we talk about other things, but I think 6 Feet Under probably did this better as a
Mm-hmm.
show. I mean, there's flaws in that show, but there's individual episodes or runs
Yeah,
that are like far more profound than this, as a movie.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. 6 Feet Under, it is very much peaks and valleys, but the peaks are so high that you excuse every time it dips.
Yeah, so it's just, this is just unfortunately sort of like movies like Terms of Endearment, or a lot of 80s movies. This is somewhat a product of its time. But historically, if you do want to study film, if you are a film historian, which is what I think a lot of the young film buffs, what upsets me is they're obsessed with kind of like the modern. They want to talk about the bluest as the warmest colors. They want to talk about the moonlights. They're obsessed with Criterion.
Yeah,
And it's a lot of it, I think, is because there isn't the cable generation. I do think it's because of streaming and YouTube, and I'm not knocking that because I watch YouTube as
yeah,
much as anyone. But you don't kind of go back and document. I could see a Your Movie Sucks or one of these kind of film critic channels that's big now, essay channels. They would give this movie a bad review, or they wouldn't talk about it as positively, or they wouldn't think about it a certain way. And maybe it's just our age and stuff, but you have to see this. You talk about like you have to give credit in the context of the time that he made this movie and all the stuff that came about because of it. That does matter. Like,
yeah.
uh,
One thing that gets me, yeah, the modern critics, which I just don't respect. I think they're just looking
no,
for clicks and views, and it's a
yes,
hustle. That's fine.
it's
Make your money,
the grind,
but I'm not
man.
interested.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
they're YouTubers who are film critics, but they're not really film critics or film historians. And I'm not trying to say I'm better than any of them, but I watch a lot of these videos. So, and It seems like none of them have seen a movie before like 2000.
And that's what I was gonna say is like to them the peak would be like an Ari Aster movie or Robert Eggers or something. And if someone showed me, one of those movies, an A24 movie, which Moonlight I'm fine with. I don't dislike Moonlight, but if you showed it to me and said this is one of the best films ever made, and I'd never seen a movie before, I probably wouldn't be interested in movies.
Yeah. Well, I think there's been this. I think people think of a movie as good cinematography and it's quiet and quaint. That's what got me about Moonlight is like how there's
Yeah,
you start with the Marshall Ali character and it's like a really interesting movie, and then in the middle I'm like, what the fuck is this movie?
that's kind of my issue. It gets less. I liked it less with each different transition.
Yeah.
I liked
But
all three, but together it didn't really work for me.
no, and there's a lot of that with movies today where it's like, well, it's Midsommar and all these movies that like, and they're pretty movies. They have great cinematography, and then they just
Yeah,
hint at themes, but they don't. Or yeah, Robert Eggers like The Witch, and everybody praises it, and I'm like, this is such a non-movie to me. I'm not impressed by this at all.
yeah.
And you
It's
guys
just a
all,
whole theatrical experience too. It was so funny. It was like a crowded room, like every seat was
yeah.
taken, and the audience hated it. They were laughing
No,
at it.
it's a bad movie, and I'll say that I
Yeah, it
like
is.
fuck. And people will make these essays being like, "This shot has this meaning, and it's about this," and they'll praise a guy like that, and then they will watch something like this and say it dated. Lawrence Kasdan, what he's doing with the script is so much more impressive than any of these modern praised art house films.
Yeah, no, it's laughable to even compare them.
This would be so much harder to do to sit down and write a script like this than to make one of those
Yeah.
movies. And
Well,
that's the era we're in right now, where it's like, well, it's got nice visuals. They don't explain anything. There's a lot of quiet scenes. It's a masterpiece. I mean, it's like if you make a movie
yeah.
now. I had a bit about this. I had this idea of a movie called Water Cooler, where it's like no dialogue and it's just this guy accidentally hits a kid with this car, and then he goes to have a relationship with the parents afterwards, and he feels guilty about it. And I would have nobody talking. It would just be a lot of beautiful shots, a lot of natural lighting, and it would have 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. But if you actually sat down and
Mhm.
wrote a script with a lot of dialogue, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of little things of dialogue that build up and pay off in later things, like in this movie, and people would think of that as generic.
Well, that is the thing. Our culture, and I think this is an issue of Eastern influence in media, which isn't entirely bad, but
No.
I think an issue that I have is that I think Eastern things work in the East, and I think a lot of like Western, especially men, trying to emulate that poorly is offensive and usually tasteless. And I think minimalism is one of the biggest issues. Is people think because something's minimalist, therefore it's tasteful, and I think often that is not the case. And I think something you could say in a weird way, even the Big Chill's a high concept, but it's like few locations, simple to make in a lot of ways. It would seem. I think it is a maximalist movie with the soundtrack, with the dialogue, with the emotional gamut that it runs. I think it's a maximalist movie, but a modern filmmaker would be like, oh, well, it's going to be a film about grief. I'm going to do the most minimalist route I could do. And because it doesn't give you much, that means it's tasteful. But I actually think it would be rather tasteless.
Yeah, it would be more of those scenes where they are walking in the field and not
Yeah,
talking. And in real life, that like to me, I don't want to be this way. It's maybe that'd be fucking boring if I was with a bunch of people, nobody was talking, we were just staring at the sky. It's like what? Why would I watch that? It's unentertaining, and
exactly.
it doesn't have depth and meaning because like you could say this shot has some thematic meaning to it. Like that's bullshit. It's not Jodorowsky, it's not David Lynch, it's not Bergman.
Yeah.
Don't play these games with me.
Well,
Like
here's what I always say when people are like, oh, well, Hereditary has all these different meanings you didn't get. I'm like, okay, explain it. Oh, it's so deep. It has all these different symbols. It's like, oh, it means grief. It's about how mental illness is hereditary. And it's a simple bullshit. But when you say, like, okay, break it down for me, if it's so deep and complex, because that's the thing. If I'm going to explain something and I know I'm right, I can explain it. But whenever somebody's like, I'm right, can you explain why? No, I'm so right, I can't even explain it to someone like you. And they're lying. If you can't account for it, you're full of shit. You got to back it up with numbers.
well, also when the themes are obvious, when it's like so stated like that, you could be like, well, that's what Hereditary Bats is about. We're like this movie. we don't really understand some of the decisions of the things in this movie. We're trying to figure it out. I don't know why Lawrence Kasdan
Yeah,
made some of these decisions. I don't know why all the characters do what they do. And that's kind of like life.
yeah.
That's what stories are. Stories are like things we make for ourselves to make sense out of what life is. Because we give it a narrative to give it structure, because what the fuck is this that we're going through? Like reality and consciousness. Like, not to get too crazy, but like, what is this? What's going on right now? You know what I mean? And like, so
Hmm.
you have to give a structure to it to have it make sense. And I think a lot of movies are just, it's this millennial or zoomer, and even memes having like 12 meanings. It's sort of just this nihilistic, apathetic, detached view of things. So people find that appealing, and then critics just praise it because they want to seem intelligent instead of calling it for what it is, which is just like a
It's
bad
the emperor's
movie.
new clothes. They don't
Yeah.
want to be the critic that says, I don't think this is that deep. My thing is, I have nothing against cryptic filmmaking. You know, you can be like Kubrick or something. People talk about that, but I don't have an issue with like symbolism or visual language in storytelling. Of course, it's when it's just very obvious and shallow. And like I always make fun of Parasite, where it's like people say it's so deep because like when they have to go up to the rich neighborhood, they walk up the stairs like they're ascending, like they're in class. And the rich people, they look down on the poor people. I'm like, yeah, that's kindergarten shit. Are you fucking
Yeah.
with me?
I
That
know.
impresses you?
I know.
Are you fucking
The rich
simple?
people live upstairs, and then the poor guys staying down in the bunker downstairs. And I like Parasite, but yeah, it's like you can't have a more obvious visual metaphor of class than they're up here and we're
Yeah.
down here. And it's like,
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily bad, and it plays into the movie with the flooding and all that later. But like when people say it's the deepest thing they've ever seen in a movie, it's silly.
well, I never got that when people talked about Parasite that way, because I just saw Parasite as more like genre entertainment. I think he was playing with because really to me that movie's playing with the
Yeah,
trope of like the person under the floorboards kind of horror short story.
yeah,
And but what if the person under there, like, there was more going on and there was sort of a class thing to it? And I think he was doing, which is what Bong Joon Ho always does. It's like, okay, it's a comedy, now it's a satire, now it's a thriller, now it's a serious film. And that's what makes
yeah.
South Korean films so exciting, is that
Well,
they do, David Fincher movies do that too, you know.
do you ever notice people who think Parasite's like the Citizen Kane of the modern times? They all have a certain political leaning that happens to line up with what they see in the movie, and it's almost like they're praising this class message more than the movie itself.
Kill the rich.
Yeah, no, it's always those
He
types.
stabs the rich people. Yeah. And I think people have shallow interpretations of it. I think a lot of people viewed it that way. I don't think that he's praising the poor family in that movie. I think he shows them as
No,
flawed for being that way, that they are being deceptive. They're the parasites inside of this
yeah.
house, and they think they deserve these things, and that these people are bad and that they should take it from them. But they're really kind of
They're
like
doing all these bad things to do it.
yeah, and I don't think it's this like raw. I think people read it that way and talked about it that way, but I don't actually think it's that simplistic with the way it's approaching it. I think it actually is
Yeah.
exploring like the flaws of both sides of that. That sure it is. There is obviously like a class issue in the countries and the world right now of like, okay, the people that have stuff have way too much, and we get way too little and way too little opportunity. But that also doesn't mean like you have a right to deceive
Yeah.
them and be a criminal, and to y- and I think the movie's fair in that way, because I think the characters who do go in there, I think they get punished. I think the sister in
Hmm.
particular ended up dying, and that's is the consequence of not valuing what you have, as opposed to thinking, well, my life would be so much better if I have what these people have, which I think isn't a good way to think about life.
Yeah. And the people that usually think it's a masterwork usually do have that reading of it, which I'm not criticizing the film. That'd be unfair to do, to criticize the film based on others' misinterpretation. But I noticed that most of the praise for the movie comes from this false place of like this Antifa type message.
Yeah, I agree. I felt that way at the time. I remember seeing it in the theater and I really liked it, and then I kind of noticed everybody was talking about it that way, and it's like, I don't know. I don't totally love these people. I actually think,
Yeah. Well, is
yeah,
it any coincidence that Parasite entered the public lexicon to describe the rich? People say, "Oh, Donald Trump's a parasite. Elon Musk is a parasite." It's like, huh, it's funny that you all praise this movie that lines up with this political message in your mind, and then you use a title of that movie to describe these things in the real world, almost like you're a simpleton.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it's a misread of kind of what the movie actually is, which I do think it is just a genre exercise. I don't think I mean, obviously it has themes with that stuff, but I think more it's like
I mean, I'm just gonna say I don't think Bong Joon Ho's a fucking philosopher. I don't think he's this class expert that people make him out to be, or he even
no.
plays up. I think he's a good genre director. I like the Train movie he made, but and even
The
oh, what's it called?
host.
The Host. Yeah, I like the first half of The Host a lot. I hate the second half. Every time that he tries to get these big messages like Snowpiercer, like you ever notice that good food costs money and shitty food's cheap? Like
Yeah.
it's very surface level. It's not his strength as a storyteller. I actually think he's very much like Guillermo del Toro in that way,
Yeah.
where his like messaging is very on the nose. But for Snowpiercer, it's a genre movie, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
You don't watch the movie and like, oh, now I understand
well,
class. You watch it and have a great time.
the great directing.
Yeah.
He's a cuz like I think his best movie is still Memories of Murder, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it suffers from all the things. I think that is a great film as a police procedural. But I get the Del Toro thing where it's like, yeah, this is like brilliantly made and directed, but like all these things that people like praise this guy for are like, I'm not blown away by this. Like, this is like, freshman college level stuff for me. I'm not like,
Yeah.
I'm not sitting around thinking about like, wow, how deep the shape of water was. Wow.
Yeah. No, it's insane.
That stuff. But yeah, we're kind of going on a separate tangent here. But that was the big chill.
Yep.
That was the big chill in cinema chats. Please subscribe. Please hit the donation button. Give us some money. Because we want to join the upper class, obviously. And thank you for watching.